Merrimack TV is committed to our community. From gavel-to-gavel coverage of town and school board meetings to updates on town services and projects, we aim to keep you connected.
Good morning, I'm Kyle Fox, Public Works Director for the town of Merrimack.
Hi, I'm Diane Trippett. I'm the town clerk tax collector for the town of Merrimack.
I'm Captain Matt Tarleton with the Merrimack, New Hampshire Police Department.
And keep the public informed of every motion.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
And many moments, so you can be confident that we're here for you. Thanks for watching. Stay connected. Follow Merrimack TV on Facebook.
Okay, great. Good evening. Welcome to the Merrimack School Board special meeting for August 31st, 2020. Please take your phones off mute and rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag
of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You know, when you come off mute, you get what you get with these days, right?
I know there's lots of echoing, which makes it interesting. The next item on the agenda is the public participation and guidelines for remote meetings. Because we are remote, we can't take live testimony like we normally would. So if anyone wants to send any public comments, please send them in one of two ways. You can send an email to publiccomments@sau26.org, or if you go to the district website, www.sau26.org, on the posting of our meeting tonight, you will see a linked form that you may complete. Regardless, we do require your name and address for the record. So if you are sending an email to publiccomments@sau26.org, you must include your name and address for the record. Based on the amount of information we get tonight, our goal is always to read off verbatim any of the public comments that we have as we have received them. If the comments do become too heavy, we may need to just include them in the final minutes. It's really an all or nothing proposition. We haven't had a situation yet where we haven't been able to read all of the public comments, but I do like to just state that. So should the event happen that there's so many of them that we will include them in the meeting notes, and just want to address that up front. The third item is the board discussion concerning football. So when we met last, we received a recommendation from administration and Mike Susi, and one of the items on that was regarding the football season for this year. The board at that time had asked to table that discussion so that additional information could be obtained, and as part of that, a group has come forward, a couple of folks have come forward and asked to be on the agenda. So we'll start off this discussion with our guests, one of whom is Kevin Sadowski, as well as student Stephen, who is a senior at Merrimack High School. He's a student athlete that's representing his teammates. Welcome. I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Could you share the screen as well? Or can I share my screen, Cinda?
I'm having a hard time hearing, but you can go ahead and share.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me, most importantly. My name's Kevin Sadowski. My wife, Kristen, and I live at 27 Brienne Drive. And before I even get started, I just wanted to thank you very much, all of you, for the tireless efforts that you've been putting in pertaining to getting our children, the teachers, and the staff back to school safely. These are monstrous decisions, and I just greatly appreciate everything you're doing, and certainly the additional week to consider football. So with that said, Kristen and I have three children. Raina graduated in 2018. My son Dylan is a senior currently, and my son Owen is a sophomore. They've done various extracurricular activities over the years to include soccer, track, lacrosse, hockey, and football. So to say the least, we understand the risks and the rewards of youth sports, whether it be, the positive benefit of their mental and physical health, the camaraderie, the life lessons that they learn, or the risks of what used to be broken bones, concussions, or worse, and now we add COVID into the mix. As you all mentioned at the last meeting, these certainly are tough times. With that said, just in the essence of time to dig in, at the last meeting, you guys were really clear and presented some very good rationale for the return to high school sports in today's environment. And so we know that you understand the importance of that. We know that that the kids will play elsewhere, whether it be in travel clubs, and that we prefer them to play right here in town where it's a safer environment. And I think we all know that a lot of these kids already lost last spring season, and we don't want them to lose this coming up fall season, whether that's the athletes, the coaches, or the families. So with that said, at the last meeting, I believe there were three major concerns, of which the first one was that the other schools in the area had not yet made their decision on football. Secondly, that there was a lack of football-specific data, and that you didn't feel that there were enough reasonable safety protocols put in place. So I was hoping to run through these with you, starting with the first one, which is some of the things that have changed in the last week, right? Who's in and who's out. Several of our surrounding towns have in fact made their decision, and we feel they've made it, based on intelligent review of the data and an understanding that they can responsibly and safely get back to football this fall. So let's take a look at who's in and who's out just in the last week. If you can see that here, all the teams on the left have since determined that they're in to play football. And we have a few on the right that have said that they were not gonna. The teams highlighted in green are the Division I teams. And you'll see that a lot of the teams that we would in fact play have said yes. Whether it be Nashua North, Nashua South, Bishop Gurdon, Keene, a couple of the Manchester schools. So quite a few of the towns have in fact since said yes, they feel they can return safely, and we do as well. And the reason we do is mainly because of the data. The data is the data. I'm in medical sales. I sell diagnostic equipment to hospitals. For the past 7 years, I've sold infectious disease testing to hospitals to include flu testing, and now that company has a COVID test. So I'm really pretty familiar with the data specific to New Hampshire, and that's what I want to share with you. But I'm familiar with the data all over the country. In order for me to get into hospitals, I need to understand not only my own COVID data where I live, but all of New England. I'm very intimately involved in the data, and I'm familiar with it from all around the country. So I want to share that with you. We also brought forth some football specific information pertaining to other states. As we know, here in New Hampshire, we did not have summer football, so there was no data to share with you, but we've gathered some from around the country. We do have some comparable sports, in other words, some other sports that are classified as high risk, or higher risk, I should say, and we have some local data to share with you pertaining to that. In regards to the COVID data, honestly, New Hampshire is in tremendous shape. I think most of us know that. If not, we should be real proud of everything we've done. We've gone through a lot, right? We've done stay-at-home 1, stay-at-home 2, stay safer at home, the masks, the social distancing, the disinfecting, and it's worked. It's worked really well. We are the second best state in the country pertaining to COVID, with Vermont being number 1. And we should all be proud of that. If you look at New Hampshire in general, as of the 30th, we had 222 cases, with the percent of COVID being far less than 1%, 0.01. The country and most of your healthcare professionals would consider anything below, it's debatable, 3 to 5%. You have this thing under control. You can see we're well below 1%. For work, I tend to look at a broader, like more by the county basis. That's what hospitals look at in order to allow me in. Which county am I coming from to spread this disease? As a county, we're doing tremendous. There's currently only 69 cases, 0.01% positive. Really good. Merrimack, we're doing tremendous. 8 cases, far less than 1%, 0.03. And then some of our surrounding communities, such as Nashua, they only have 6 cases, which is remarkable, and 0.006. I'm sure this is associated with their mandatory mask stipulation that they had, but that's amazing. And 3 out of the 4 teams that we would be playing are from there, so we feel pretty safe with that. Moving on to share some of the other data from around the country, and I just wanted to stipulate that, as I mentioned, New Hampshire's number 2 with COVID. These other states are not. Okay, and they've decided to play football, and they're doing so fairly successfully. Over the summer, there were several all-star games in Indiana, Illinois, Kansas, and Nebraska. All of the articles are on the PowerPoint, so you can look this up. They had 0 COVID incidents. Now, mind you, these states are not even remotely close to the condition that New Hampshire's in. Indiana today has an 8% positivity rate. Illinois has 8.2%. Utah, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is over 8%. And Texas is over 13%. And they're playing football. We're less than 1. So again, we feel pretty safe about this. In Texas, which had the worst, they had a very tough time, as most of us know, over the summer. They still had 65,000 athletes participate in off-season camps. What's remarkable, they did have a few positive COVIDs, not surprised, with a 13% positivity rate in the community. But what was really remarkable is that 278 represented less than 1%, 0.4%. And only 4 of those were actually traced back to football. This really speaks to the fact that these kids were getting COVID outside of football, and another reason that we want to keep our kids in a controlled environment. Utah is another example. They've begun football for the fall. They have a very large active case base out there. There's over 7,700 cases today of COVID compared to the 222 that we have. They have 102 teams. In the first week, 50 of the 51 teams were able to play. 1 team did not, because they did catch some COVID. And that was due to their mitigation efforts, and they were able to prevent any issues. So again, I think that risk versus reward, as they've gone through 3 weeks now, I think week 2 is fine. Week 3, they did cancel a game as well. Again, not related to football though. 3 students in the school got COVID, or tested positive, I should say. And out of an abundance of caution, that team decided to cancel their game. So lots of success. And again, Utah is over 8% positivity today. We're less than 1. So with that said, New Hampshire, again, we only have a couple hundred cases. We've done well. We think about 58 teams in the state will end up wanting to play or be able to play. We would propose focusing on 4 to 6 games in our conference. And if you see in the towns that we talked about, very low case percentage. Merrimack 8, Nashua 6, Keene has 1 to 4 cases. These are the folks we'd be playing. Possibly a couple regional games. Hudson, Londonderry, Salem, Derry, Wyndham, or Bedford, all doing extremely well. So again, risk versus reward, we feel we could safely and responsibly get back to playing this fall. This I've pretty much already covered, guys. It shows right there. I mean, these are the other states, Texas, Illinois in purple. They're way off the chart. New Hampshire's down here. This is the blue line. We're doing so good. We're like a straight line. We don't even show anymore. That's why we're the second best in the country pertaining to positivity rate, all due to the efforts, the mitigation efforts that have been done. Just to share, again, we didn't have football specifically in New Hampshire, but we certainly did have some, sports that were higher classified that we feel are comparable. We have some great club sports for lacrosse in New Hampshire. The New Hampshire Tomahawks team had 161 players that played from June through August. They had over 105 games. They played not just in New Hampshire, by the way. They played in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. So again, some states with much higher rates than ours. And what's really nice is 0 recorded cases. Not an issue whatsoever. They're about to start their fall season, and they have 293 players about to go there. We also have the 4-leaf lacrosse program. They have 164 players that participated from June through August. They played over 200 games throughout New England with 0 issues. So really quite remarkable. And it shows how they were successfully able to get back to it. Of course, all these teams did significant mitigation, phased-in approaches, temperature checks, all the COVID things, just like we've been doing in football and the other sports. It's not on this slide, but my youngest son, Owen, also participated in ice hockey here in the state of New Hampshire over the summer. He was in a program for high school students. They played July through August, approximately 16 games, about 200 kids. They played 2 games a week over in Hooksett, full contact, again, with significant mitigation efforts, masks, temperature checks, phased in, reduction of fans at the games, with 0 COVID cases. So really remarkable. This can be done, and it can be done safely with the extra efforts from the players, the parents, the coaches, and everybody else. So, and that's what we feel it's all about, is the risk mitigation. As we know, the football players have been doing their preseason activity for the last several weeks and following all these protocols that were laid out from Merrimack High School, as well as the New Hampshire Interscholastic Athletic Association. And as we know, those include temperature checks, COVID questions, stay home if you're sick, masks, no carpooling, so on and so forth, clean the equipment. And the kids and the coaches and the families have been diligently doing that for several weeks. We would like to continue to do that as we move from phase 3 to 4. And we would really like to be able to participate, like the other sports in town, in the principles that you laid out last week for the safe return. And I think we've shown that we can do all of these responsibly and effectively. We really feel, number 2 here, keeping these athletes under our control is our best bet. They will go play elsewhere. They will do other things, and that's going to be under somebody else's supervision. And then they'd still be going back to school. We'd rather keep them right in our town where they should be and keep them healthier. The team obviously separates out our players between varsity, JV, and freshmen, as well as the locations that they practice in order to decrease exposure. And again, we're going to continue to follow the guidelines, which has been a phased-in approach, just like everything else that we're doing in society, to gradually get back to some sense of normalcy. We also have some pretty cool face coverings that I want to show you here that we're considering obtaining for the team to really mitigate any, sweat or anything like that. But the most important thing is this phased-in approach and the understanding of the need to continue to monitor the numbers, to continue to be diligent from the athlete to the coach to the family in doing what we need to do to get rid of this disease. And we would do that up until the point of even have to canceling games, such as what other areas have had to do, and our current sports would have to do as well. So we're willing to do that. And these are the shields, the cage cover and the face shield that I just wanted to show you that we're looking towards. This is from a company called Performance Award Center, and they've got these cage covers, very inexpensive and available. It can either go on the outside of the helmet like this or on the inside. Most of us seem to prefer this inside one for a variety of reasons. I think it provides better protection, no visibility issues, and your competitor can't rip it right off your face. So we like this here, very economical, and we think it would add to it. Obviously, there are other masks that Adidas sells and Under Armour that a lot of our kids already have, and they're designed for professional athletes to play football, so on and so forth. The other one that we've come up with is from Shoot, and they're a helmet maker. And this here is a glass shield that would go on the inside and do similar things, obviously protect sweat and whatnot from getting at you. This is another good alternative, a little more expensive, a little more difficult to obtain. But ideas that we have that, again, we feel would add to our ability to safely return to football this fall. So with that said, in the essence of time, I know Stephen has a few things to say. And in closing, we hope you found that the COVID data for New Hampshire and the fact that we're doing so well, along with the football specific data that has shown that other areas that are not doing so well have been very successful in returning, and the fact that the majority of our surrounding towns have made the decision to move forward. We hope that these three things will allow you to more confidently realize that we can safely and responsibly return this fall to play Merrimack High School football. So with that said, we respectfully ask that you give a favorable vote to play football here in town this fall. The athletes, the coaches, the family, and I truly believe the town of Merrimack really needs this. We need positive things to move forward, and these are the things that we all look forward to week after week, whether you're an athlete, a coach, a family member, or others in the town. So please give us a favorable vote. We want to move forward and focus on all of these efforts that we need to do to be successful. Get the games on cable TV for Friday nights so the whole town can enjoy them. So thank you very much for your time, and that's all I had this evening.
So Kevin, would you mind if Stephen was able to say his comments and then we just go into questions after that?
That'd be perfect, yeah.
Works
Okay,
for me.
thank you. Go ahead, Stephen.
Can everyone hear me all right?
I can.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, school board members. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steven. I'm a senior at Merrimack High School, and I play defensive back on the football team. And before I get started, I just wanted to thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to speak to you and advocate on behalf of all the players on the team. And I am in favor of football occurring this fall for a handful of reasons. To start, when we have been able to get together as a team, everyone's been conscious of our current situation relating to COVID-19, and we have been taking many precautions. We've been following the guidelines set in place by NHIAA. Before every practice, we have to fill out a paper which asks us questions about like if we've been exposed to COVID. We record our temperature. We social distance as much as possible, and we sanitize our hands after every practice. And my second reason for why we should play football relates to the life lessons that it provides. To start, there's working hard to achieve goals. If you want to get on the field, you have to earn your spot. No starting position is guaranteed for any individual. And if you want something, you have to put the work in for it. This is something that I've learned personally from football, just from being in the weight room and hanging around with the upperclassmen. You learn quick that there aren't any shortcuts. And another lesson that football teaches is how to lead so that other people will listen. Before I started playing football, I was much more shy and I didn't really voice my opinion very often. But now, with thanks to the coaching staff, they've taught me how to be someone people can look up to. And I really thank them for that. And another lesson that football teaches is how to be selfless. And this is what I believe is the most important lesson. And it's something that some other sports can't really teach, and it's unique to football. Um, there are kids who may never touch the ball for the entire season, yet they still show up to practice and work just as hard as everyone else. And that just goes to show how football teaches kids to sacrifice their own personal values for the greater good of the team. Um, Without a football season, many kids and underclassmen could learn or miss out on learning these valuable lessons. Had I not played football, I would be a much lesser version of myself, both physically and emotionally. And which leads me to my third reason, relating to the mental health of all the players on the team. For us seniors, we have put in so much hard work, time, and energy into football these past 3 years, and just not having a season would be devastating. We just want a chance to finish our football careers and go out on the right foot. The mental health of the underclassmen would also be affected positively if we were able to have a season. I think that it would allow them to mature and step out of their comfort zones, and more importantly, it gives them a schedule in which we can improve their focus in school. I remember when I was a freshman and sophomore, just having that routine of football after school and homework after football really improved my focus on my schoolwork and helped me get better grades. And Coach Jackson will tell you, believe it or not, us players, we get better grades during the football season as opposed to out of it. I know it might sound hard to believe, but it's true. And anyways, that's just a handful of reasons that I wanted to present to you guys for why we should have a football season this fall. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm hoping that you guys will vote in favor of us having a season. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Before I open it up for board questions, Dr. McLaughlin or Mr. Susi, is there anything that, did you have any questions, or is there anything that you wanted to respond with?
Well, I'll just briefly say thank you very much to both Mr. Sadowski and Mr. Petz. I think both are an example of why we have such a great community. Stephen is a great example of the kinds of students that we have. I would just like to say your presentation skills are outstanding, so credit to your teachers who provided you with whatever that was. I think probably a lot of that is just you yourself, but and Mr. Sadowski, certainly we thank you very much for that really informative report. All I really want to say, and then I want to turn it over to Mr. Susi, is that, and I think it bears repeating, but I just, since we have an opportunity to talk about this again, I just want to reiterate that our goal has always been, the safety of our students. And it might be that on a given day with a specific decision, it might be that, people could agree or not agree with the decision. But what I'm sure we can agree on is that one way or the other, what we're trying to do is look out for the safety and well-being of our students. And I think the thing that has just always sort of burdened me, particularly a little bit this summer, is trying to figure out, trying to predict what could happen when we bring students and staff back together. We've had 6 months of a virus, but no school. And I know that that's a concern of everybody's. And the big question is what happens when that happens. And so we're doing all that we can to mitigate the effects of that, but the data is not clear on what will happen, going forward. So it's sort of, that's been the spirit in which we've tried to approach everything. And so we're very supportive of whatever happens tonight, and we will do what we can in either case, whichever way the board chooses to go. We will do all we can to support our students, and so I just thank you both for presenting and for doing so with such good information and such well thought out arguments. So thank you.
I really don't have much to add to that. I'll echo Dr. McLaughlin's sentiments. I really appreciate the time and the effort it took for you guys to put together your presentations and how well thought out they were. Stephen, very impressed with you, as I usually am when I run into you at school as well. You've come a long, long way since freshman year. So again, kudos to your parents first and foremost, and then kudos to your teachers as well. You've certainly learned those life lessons.
Thank you, Mr. Susie.
You're very welcome, bud. And you know, again, it's the data is the data, and as Dr. McLaughlin said, you know, we'll do whatever the school board wishes us to do, and you know, if you decide to move forward with football, we'll try to do it as safely as we possibly can. And if you don't, then we'll try to find an alternative for those kids. You know, that's what we're charged to do.
Great. Thank you. So I'll open it up to board questions. I see Shannon. Go ahead.
Thank you. So the question is, I guess, to whoever has the data. So Mike, I think you might have it as well. I know that some of the schools that are opting in for football are requiring during the playing season that students maintain 100% remote instruction. And I didn't know if you knew of the teams that we were looking to play. Are some of those being considered for that model?
So right now it's really hard to determine because there are a number of schools that still haven't made a determination on whether they're opting in or opting out for football yet. So we really haven't gotten into a scheduling standpoint as athletic directors. What I would say is that our traditional bubble that we would try to be in would be with the three Nashua schools, North, South, and Bishop Girton, with the crossover maybe with an Auburn, Salem, Londonderry, one of those schools. Initially, Keene was in our bubble as well, but their school board made the determination that they're not going to play any school inside of Hillsborough or Rockingham counties. So they're really, you know, restricting their regional competition out in Keene, so we wouldn't have Keene. But any of the other surrounding communities would certainly be an option for us. And to the best of my knowledge, the only school that has decided to require their kids to be remote if they're playing football is Bedford.
Okay. That was the only question I had.
Okay. I see Lori. You're on mute. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So I want to thank both Kevin and Stephen for your presentation tonight. I think that football is very important for physical, mental, social well-being. And you hit all the major points that I was going to talk about tonight. Out of the 6 New England states, all of them are playing football. Massachusetts seems to be playing a flexible schedule. Vermont is playing flag football, and everyone else is opening in September with football. And I think when I think about football, I think it is a safer place for teens to be. I think they're with their friends. There's leadership skills, which I think Stephen showed today, what leadership skills and how to be an advocate, how to be a leader for his team, to come here tonight and give us such a great presentation from his heart, but also with data. I'm very supportive of that. And I want to thank you both for coming in your presentation tonight.
Any other question? Andy?
So first, a couple of facts. The question, Shannon asked the question about districts doing remote or not. We know that Bedford is maybe even meeting tonight, I'm not sure, because their decision initially was no football. And then last week they said, we may offer football, but athletes will be remote on the football team. I do know, and Lori, I'd like for you to confirm this as well. Manchester made a decision to be fully remote through the first quarter, which means that their football players will all be remote learners during this period. And according to what I just read, Nashua, at least through the beginning of October, is remote as well. So that means for those schools as well in Manchester and Nashua that we play, all of those student athletes are remote at least for the first month, if not longer, depending on what goes on. So, sort of to get to the point that I've also raised that Shannon brought up is it feasible that if the board made a decision to allow football, that student athletes during at least the first couple of months or whatever maybe the season, were limited to be remote learners to potentially reduce exposure possibility to the rest of the school? I mean, I don't know that I'm necessarily buy into it, but it's a point of view that I'm seeing in some districts, because the opt-in opt-out list that Kevin showed earlier doesn't really call that out. It doesn't call out. I mean, so I think to Mike's point, there are a lot of districts that have made the decision to do football, but what's not clear from that list is how many of those students are in person in class with the rest of the school body during the football season. So to me, that's sort of the question that I think we need to grapple with as a board.
Cinda?
Dr. McLaughlin, go ahead.
So if I could just speak to that, and I really would like Mike to speak to that too. I think that going down that road begs the question about what's more important, our athletics or our academics, and in the case of those communities that are fully remote, I think what we've learned is that as hard as we tried in the spring and as hard as we're going to try now, for many students, fully remote is not an optimal environment for academics. And so I just would say I would be very reluctant to endorse that model. I think that if the board were to endorse football, then we would do it under the conditions of right now offering choice, hybrid to those who've opted for hybrid, and remote to those who've opted for remote. But I really, in conscience, could not, for myself, support a mandate where football players would be separated out of the academic environment. So I understand that I'm just one voice and I'm not the decider, but I just have to really say how strongly I feel about that particular.
Okay, I see Kevin, then John, then Brandy, and Larry.
Super quick, I just wanted to add, Dr. McLaughlin, I can only speak specifically for my family, obviously, but we feel the same way. My preference would be to send our boys to the high school. I think the in-house learning is far superior than at home. That's our feeling in general. And we think it's that controlled environment that I talked about with sports, that's the same with school. Let's face it, when these kids are home, they're doing 2-3 hours worth of school, and then they're roaming all over the place. We'd rather have them in school, and we think we can do it safely. We think that's the best approach, is hybrid, or whatever your choice is, actually. In our case, it's hybrid, and to play football. We think we can do both safely.
John?
Thank you. I would agree totally that we've spent the last 3 months, many days and nights, coming up with an instructional model that promotes all of our children and allows them to have choice in either a hybrid model or a remote model. That is, we've done our best to try to make those equal platforms for students to learn on. And I think that the choice is at the center of what we've tried to create a total universally designed supporting aspect for all of our students. And I think being mandated into one would not be a strong choice.
Stephen, did I see you go to raise your hand? Brandy?
This is a tough one for me. And Andy, I appreciate what you're saying, and I would like to learn more about how many districts and have some concrete information surrounding how many districts are planning to do that, because I do think that's an interesting idea and one that we might want to consider. Dr. McLaughlin, you said which is more important or more valuable, education or sports, and for me, it's not a question.
I could just say, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to be quoted right. I wasn't trying to make a parallel between one, I mean, I just want to be clear that what I said was that this begs the question, what are we here for, academics or athletics? And so I'm not trying to suggest that sports are not important. I just want to be very clear about that. I just want to be very clear. I don't want to be misquoted.
Okay.
It's very clear to me that all are important, but the issue that Board Member Schneider raised about potentially putting kids into a remote setting to play football begs the question: what are we prioritizing? That's all I was trying to say. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to be clear that I'm understanding.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you for clarifying, and I apologize that I misspoke. The challenge that I find is that for those that play sports, it's an equal level of importance. For those children that have that outlet and have that way, that team, it doesn't matter if it's football. It doesn't, I mean, in all honesty, I feel like it's any sport, and any athlete that is playing that sport, that is their outlet. That is their team. That is I've had a really stressful day at school. I've had a stressful day at home, and now I'm on the field, and this is my time for me and my teammates. There is so much that comes with that is valuable, and lessons that no classroom can teach, no home life can teach. So from that standpoint, I am in support of all sports being played. The challenge here is that we're not really talking about sports being played or not. We're talking about how dangerous is it to all of our student body if we allow this to happen. As much as I love sports, as much as I am a huge fan of having those outlets, the question that I keep coming back to is, how do we know in all sincerity what the risk factors are to those that are not playing sports? And is it the risk versus reward? How do we immediately handle that situation? Should we start finding that our numbers do go up? Cold and flu season is happening. All of the things that typically will happen in a fall season are going to happen this season too. The added layer is COVID. So how do we immediately handle that? And that's where I'm stuck. I feel like that's where we're missing, for me, that plan of the masks are great and we're moving in the right direction, but I don't know that I have enough information to say either way at this moment, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Lori, and then Andy. Mike, I'll let you go ahead and go first, and then Lori, and then Andy.
So I want to speak first to the remote learning model. There are a number of school districts that are going fully remote, but they're going fully remote as a matter of course for the district, right? It's not specific to sports. It's not specific to football. The only school district that I'm aware of that is specific to football is Bedford. So that's just what I know as of right now. The piece for academic success, I want to speak to a little bit, because I monitor this on a regular basis with our athletes. And I can tell you that we had a lot of athletes that really struggled during the remote learning time in the spring semester. And while we may not have all that many reflected in an ineligible list for fall sports right now, part of that is because we lessened the passing grade for the quarters. that made more kids eligible. Because if a passing grade is a 55 as opposed to a 65, makes a big difference. If I took a look at all of the athletes that registered for fall sports and kept the benchmark at 65, I would be willing to bet we would be somewhere at about anywhere between 35 and 50 kids ineligible for fall sports out of the 300 that have registered. And some of those are football players. And so I really do believe if as a board you make a decision that you're going to move forward with football, but those athletes have to study remotely, I really believe that we are disadvantaging some of them. Not all of them, but some of them from an academic standpoint. So.
Lori?
So I have a couple things to say. I appreciate what Brandy's saying, but going back to what Dr. McLaughlin said, Merrimack has worked tremendous, they've done a lot of work this summer to come up with a concrete plan. But as we develop the plan, I think everyone on the board and the administration has been very open-minded to try to do the best work that we could for our community, our student athletes. And, in 2016, I was fortunate enough to work at the NHIA for Life of an Athlete. I wrote that curriculum. I understand that athletics is just an extension of the classroom. What the lessons that people are learning on those fields are lifelong lessons, the friendships that they're gaining. All of that is so important. So for me, it comes down to how do we do it safely, and understanding that we're going forward, but we might have to push the pause button. Understanding that it's all depends on what's going on. Right now in New Hampshire, there's 6 hospitalizations. I mean, New Hampshire is doing great. And I think that we just need to stay, ahead of it and be monitored to the situation. I do not think it would be fair to have our students go remote if they play football. I think Bedford is the only school that's considering it, but we have many kids on our football teams that are on 504s that have an IEP. They have a right to a free appropriate education. If they say that's in school, they're coming in school. And then going back to Kevin's point, if they're not playing football in Merrimack, they're playing sports on these travel teams. And you know what? They're coming to school every day.
Andy?
So hearing all that, I also heard during Kevin's presentation a lot of facts, a lot of ways to move forward, and I heard a lot of we. So I'm going to be very blunt here. Is that we heard a recommendation last week by the athletic director and superintendent, no for football. I've heard a parent express the viewpoint that we should be able to play football based on the facts and based on the certain protocols. What I need to understand is, are these protocols and directions that are known to and supported by the Merrimack School District? Should we as a board decide to let football go? Is that the sort of thing that's going to happen to be able to protect the players and the student body? And will administration carry those? Are there different ones? I need to know what it is that we might be proposing based on this, because it wasn't clear the culmination of the presentation versus other discussions that may have occurred. So I want this on the table because we're going to be making a decision tonight, and I want to make sure everything is understood cleanly.
So
Mike probably could as well. The ones that I refer to are the Merrimack High School guidelines to returning to sports that we've been following to the letter for the past 6 to 8 weeks, that were rolled out in order for us to begin phase 1. And they start at NHIAA. They lay out the law, if you will, and then the school, we adopt them, right? So I think it's a combination of New Hampshire Interscholastic Athletic Association and Merrimack High School's guidelines that were well thought out and extremely detailed and very effective.
Just to be clear, I'm talking about should the season start, because in the plans that have been rolled out in Merrimack so far were around the other sports and getting to this point. And the NHAA does have guidance to go to phase 4, but we're talking about what we as a district would do should the season start, the kind of precautions or things that could occur when the season starts, how we would behave as a district.
These are the guidelines for the safe return.
No, I know. I understand. I've read that. I want to understand from the athletic director's standpoint how he would handle situations when we go back to playing competitive football with those districts, should things occur, and some of the safety things that you shared around things like guard, face guard protectors and things like that. I need to know what this would look like if we did move forward and sort of at that level. That's what I need to understand.
So if I could just jump in briefly, and then I'm gonna toss the mic because he's really the one we need to hear. So I think when Mr. Sadowski said we, I believe that Merrimack has demonstrated, the Merrimack community, I'm not just talking about the district, the Merrimack community has demonstrated in a lot of things that we're willing to work together to a common goal. And so when Mr. Sadowski presents certain options or additional mitigation, I think he's right to say we. If the board opts to go along with the football recommendation, the district will do everything in its power to support that move, including putting into place, what Mr. Sadowski referenced and any other things that we find. But I want to be clear about why we made the initial recommendation that we did, which is, again, not to be punitive to football, but rather because the information that we have suggests that that is the one sport that it's harder to put precautions in place, to keep it safe. It's harder to do it for football than for some of the other sports. Not that the other sports are risk-free, but on a scale, it would be harder to do it for football. And so that was the original decision. That's the basis for the original decision. So that hasn't, that is what it is. That's why it was. Certain things like the masks that Mr. Sadowski mentioned, I know that that's been a factor that's been contemplated for a while. But then there were some concerns about those even and the ripping. But there's a way to work through most everything. I think we proven that. But what I just want to say is back to the original point. The original point was that based on as good information as we have, then it seemed like we could not, in good conscience, say that we can create conditions equal to or that better than or equal to that of the other sports. And we just didn't feel comfortable putting our students in that place. But that doesn't mean that if the board chooses, for very good reasons, if it should choose that we won't do all we can to support making it as safe as possible. The only other thing that I would say that continues, and it's just a variation on what I've said before, is that what is concerning to me about the academic program that's going to start, in in just a little over a week, or the athletics, is when you bring people back, none of us know what happens when that happens. And all I'm saying is that we have done everything we can. Mr. Sadowski's data is accurate. New Hampshire has done very, very well. And God bless the citizens of New Hampshire for following reasonable guidelines to get us to be in this creditable place. But the unknown is what happens when you bring people back. And Matt and his team have done everything they can to create a safe environment for our learners. And yet I fully admit that we just don't know how that's going to play out. So we've done all we can, and I am confident that when we bring students back a week from now, that they will be in as safe an environment as we can make it. And the question for football was, can we say the same thing about our football players? And if we can't, then that was the basis for our, for our recommendation. So to Andy's point, if you're asking, is what Mr. Sadowski said, or the we, is, does the district buy into that? Of course we will, 100%. And if the board opts to point us in that direction, then there will be no stone unturned. And then the great unknown is what will happen when that happens. And if somebody has a crystal ball and can predict for me, then I would really like to see it. But what I would say is that what has been the data point to get us to this place is absent the most critical variable, which is what happens when you bring people back together. And so, again, I appreciate Mr. Sadowski's presentation, because he has some data on teams that have, collaborated, worked, played in various states, and that's good. That's a hopeful sign. So that's good. And there's a big what if. So it's the what if that keeps me up at night. That's all. Mike, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I can speak a little bit to the protocols because I wrote them. Obviously, with help of a lot of other schools and the NHIA and just a lot of communication. The protocols that we put in place for summer workouts, the phased approach, phase 1, 2, and 3, were rolled out to all sports, including football. And so they have been following those protocols since we rolled out summer workouts sometime in the first or second week of July. I can't even remember when now. It seems like 3 years ago to me. So they've been following those protocols. The phase 4 protocols would really be very similar in a lot of ways. Where it changes is that phase 4 starts competition. And so now it's not just intra-squad, but now you're traveling to other communities. Now you're playing against other opponents. And that's really where phase 4 comes into play. Phase 3 already allows shared equipment, already allows some contact. So that's what we've been doing for the last week and a half. And as far as I know, that part of things has gone okay. I haven't heard any reports otherwise. So the biggest thing with respect to what Mr. Sadowski presented was, would the board, in consideration of football, mandate the use of masks or a shield? There's been a lot of debate about that along the state. The state's health task force has not come out and said that we recommend them or mandate them. There's no data out there as to whether they would provide any additional safety or not. Some of the masks can be somewhat dangerous as far as I'm concerned. Certainly not necessarily the ones Mr. Sadowski showed, but if you got a chance to watch Exeter's presentation to their school board, he showed a mask that was very different and hung below the face shield. And I found that to be very dangerous because it's just basically another extension for somebody to grab and rip. And I wouldn't promote that at all. As far as the face shields, the plastic face shields, there's been some challenges with that too. They while they seem like they're a great idea, because they attach directly to the face mask, they come off, they break, they fog. There's a lot of challenges with that too. So if you choose to move forward with football, we will do whatever we can to make this as safe as we can. What we cannot do is change the sport. As I said in my presentation a couple of weeks ago, I have no concerns over our ability to mitigate risk to a certain degree in our practice environment. I have no concerns. I have concerns about the game, because the game is the game and we can't change it.
So here are my thoughts. First of all, I think we all know we are all here for the same reasons. It's for the health and the benefit of our students, and certainly the presentation that you gave has nothing but the students' health at the top of mind. I mean, we're all there together. The problem with this situation is that there's really no great answer because we still have COVID and we still have not great trending, not great data from a standpoint of complete best practices. I mean, even if you go on the American Academy of Pediatrics site, there's a lot of things I recommend for safety protocols just based on what we know, based on the time that we've had exposure to this pandemic. But there's no great answer. So what we're finding ourselves doing as a society is doing exactly what we've just discussed, which is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So the state, I'm talking specific to New Hampshire, because if I were in this role in a different state, then I might feel very differently than how I feel right now as it relates to this. But we've done all of those phases, and it has been a slow approach of the phases, and now we're moving to phase 4 as a state, as a football community, let's say, in this particular context. So I don't feel that, I'm just not comfortable stopping that because there is then risk to health in another standpoint, which is mental health and academics and grades. And I have 2 students in the high school level that participate in sports. I know a bunch of kids that participate in sports. And I've seen a bunch of kids really struggle in the spring with the lack of sports. And then you open up decreasing grades, mental health issues. Sometimes people spiral into depression. It's hard for them to get out. There's a lot of risks there too, outside of this obvious one that we're have no choice but to stay focused on because we're kind of living and breathing COVID every day and everything we do in the sense of the restrictions that we face in our daily lives. So I support, for a variety of reasons, letting football continue without requiring the remote. I agree with anything that's been said. I don't think remote is a good option. And also, again, that's not the right option for all kids. Some kids thrived in remote, but to require kids that may not thrive academically to go remote, I don't think that's a great choice at all. So I'm left then with, I also don't think that I feel comfortable guarantee the whole season. You know, once more data comes about, if there's issues in stage 4, then I think we have to say, hey, what's realistic for the health of our students? What's realistic? You know, what's the right choice? But going through the phases that we've been going through, I am not comfortable stopping football and not allowing these kids to play. I'm just not. And so I don't like it in the sense that there's risk. I don't like it that I can't make a black or white decision, but I feel really strongly that these children should be able to play football. They should be able to play. It's the only sport that we have on the table of completely not being able to play. So that's my position. That's why I feel that way. And Shannon, do I see you?
Thank you. I've just heard a couple of things tonight, and they're tethered to the discussion, but definitely not directly about football as well. And I heard about mental health. I think we've been hearing that for a while. We all know that this has not been an ideal situation. But in our last meeting, I don't think, you know, and this is on, I think we have to readdress it, not this specific agenda item, but if it's so important for football players, what about the robotics kids in the theater club and the arts honor society and those clubs that give them that sense of community? If we're using that as our reasoning for allowing all sports, well, there are a lot of kids who don't play sports that also struggle, and that sense of community is also a consideration for them. And how do we get them enrichment if this is how you know, we have to deliberate on things? So I'm not giving an answer, but I think we have to talk about it. So I just want to put that out there. If that's a consideration for why we're making this decision, we need to make that decision for all students, what they need to be whole outside of the basic academics, because we know that a lot more than just our athletes are struggling. So I want to spend some time on that, not with this agenda item, but I want to just put it out there. And then
Shannon, could I just, do you mind if I just comment?
Of course, no, absolutely, Mark. Thank you.
So, because that actually puts a fine point to the problem that we have right now as a district. And this is something that I've tried to share in different ways in communication throughout the spring and summer. But you just raised something, so I'll speak to it. Much as we would like, and I'm speaking on behalf of the administration right now, much as we would like to act as if COVID isn't having an impact on our operations, let's be real. It has. There is no way around it. So what we want is what we can't have. We want our students back full-time, and we want them to be able to do everything that they have always been able to do. So I have a senior at Nashua South, and I'm grappling as a parent with the fact that he didn't have a junior year that he thought he'd have, and he's not going to have a senior year that he thought he'd have. And I think it's a mistake of timing that he's born at a point that brings him to this moment. But that's not Nashua South's problem. That is our collective problem, because we have a pandemic, and it's forcing us to have to accept certain realities. So we cannot provide all things to all people right now, because we just can't. And that goes for the schedule that can only be stretched so far given the staff that we have and their freedom to choose their own path as provided by ADA and FMLA and so on. And so you make a point about football and athletics, and not everybody is a football player in athletic and involved in athletics. So what are we able to do for them? The answer is, at the moment, not as much as we would like. And so there does end up being a little bit of a question of what are we prioritizing? And there is going to come a limit, and I'm going to have to say it at some point, that we can't do X, just can't. And it's a function of COVID, not a function of this district's desire. Nobody's lazy in this district trying to just not figure out how to make things work. It's that we have 350 professional staff. We can't have 500, right? We only have, we've got the taxpayer dollars here, so we can't just, be winging and buying computers for every last person. We're trying very hard within the budget we have to do that. We're trying to provide extracurricular activities, but not now. By that, I mean sports and clubs, but not now, because we have to phase that. Clubs, sports we've said, but clubs, things, that's going to be phased in a little while. But we have to have the staff to oversee that. And so we've worked night and day to make sure we have that staff to do it when the time is ready. But the point that you raise is that we just as a community have to come to terms with the fact that it's COVID. COVID is causing us to have to make very tough choices, none of which we like. But we are going to have to do that, and it's going to mean that we either try to apply our principles, broadly, or we start getting selective. And then who's more important, and what's more important? And
that's exactly my point. It's how do you? We're spending a lot of time on our athletes, but I know that when you're talking about the arts and everything else, there's definitely areas of the district where the social emotional is a challenge. So I know we're spending this time on them, but unfortunately, you're right, there's not an easy answer. But can things be done for those clubs so that they can get a sense of community? And you're right, it might be a remote club, those kind of things. We're talking about no clubs, but could they be remote? Could we use, Google Classrooms or for after school activities, something? Because I'm really concerned about the lack of community. But we're working on it for this. And I know I'm sorry, Mr. Zasky, and I really don't want to railroad your your agenda item. But I think that when it comes down to it, that we're definitely addressing a segment of the population, but we're not, and giving their mental health consideration on this, but not the whole one. And so I may have opened up a can of worms, but I think we need to keep talking about that. And it doesn't have to be in a classroom after school that needs to be sanitized for students the next morning. And I get that. So I just wanted to put that out there. But so I don't have an answer. I don't want to railroad this agenda and do it, but I get what you're saying. But I also don't want to not consider those students who are not being addressed with that in the lack of community that they're feeling. Another point was about testing access, and I do want to get back to sports on that for a second. And we talk about we're checking temperatures, we're doing questionnaires, but is there any access to rapid testing that we could have as a district for things like a couple days before a game, those kind of things? And does the NHIAA have any discussions along those lines? So, just as they were doing before, like they were testing a couple days before games, so they would have enough time to see if they were positive before they collected. I know the U.S. Open started today, and someone already got pulled for being positive for tennis. So those kind of things. So
yeah. So I just want to be clear: the district is not doing temperature checks for students, and I want to be very clear about that. We've said that from the beginning. We're not. That is not what we're doing. But if your question is about temperature checks in relation to athletics, Mike, I think you can speak to that.
Yeah, so the screening process that we had in place all summer long is going to remain in place for athletics, even though we're not making the same screening requirements for school, simply because we can't maintain the same physical distancing requirements in athletics along with the contact that takes place as well. So the responsibility of that is going to shift, though, because we've made it a parent's responsibility all summer long because the kids have access to their parents. They're not going to have access to their parents during the school year. Some of the kids are going to be in school. Some of the kids are going to be learning remotely on particular days. And so that responsibility is now going to be deferred to the coaches. So what we've done is we utilize a platform called Family ID for athletic registrations. I had a conversation with them on Friday. They have a feature for attendance tracking, which we've never utilized before because we really didn't have a need to utilize it before. I am going to go ahead and pay for it because along with the daily attendance tracking, which is going to be tremendously important to know who's at practice each day and who's not for all of our sports, it also gives me the ability to add some tracking questions to the daily attendance. So what I've done is the regular attestation questions that we do every single day that the parents have been asking, I've built them into the attendance sheet so that every day when the coach logs into Family ID, takes his attendance before practice, he or she will ask the student athlete all of the questions, take the temperature, and then move on. So if a student athlete answers yes to any of those questions, they will not be able to participate during that day. If their temperature registers at 100 or more, they won't be able to participate that day. So we are continuing to take those precautions as best we can. We know that they don't mitigate everything. It doesn't cover the ones that are asymptomatic, but we'll potentially catch some. So we are still moving forward with that process.
Okay. So honestly, the struggle is real. I mean, as far as, I hear exactly what Brandy was saying earlier about, who you don't know is positive. We're not testing, and that's been validated. We're not going to be testing, even preparing for games. So you could have non-symptomatic students interacting, and that's a concern, especially in an aggressive sport like football, especially huddles, all that. The masks were a great presentation and option. You're right. I think some things look better than others, for practical controls, and then of course, durability. So I definitely don't, short term, long term, how that's going to be managed. But I mean, this is not, whatever decision we make, we're not going to be excited about it. I think that's the one thing I think we need to be very, so we're not saying it with, we don't have the crystal ball we want. We really don't. I don't think that if we say yes, the one concern we have is it's not necessarily the player who's healthier. We worry about the kids that might be, in proximity of that player in school in an academic setting, that may not be as healthy or may be vulnerable or may be fine and go home to someone who is. It's again, we're the chain reaction by driving all that traffic into that space, and we're the chain reaction to people that you won't even meet probably, and that's the concern I have had all along. So the kids may be more resilient to it, they may be more resistant, they may carry and not even present, but they could be going home to a parent with asthma, diabetes, um, you know, those high risk categories that will put them in a position to have grave results. So it's how our decisions can resonate beyond, the gridiron. That has me the greatest. Gives me the most trepidation. So I'm not feeling good about any of this. Um, I'm actually not even at my decision yet, and I know we've been talking about this for a couple of weeks and for even a long time tonight. But just understand that what a great decision we have to make tonight. Great being grand, not great being good. And it's not one we want to make, but we know something has to move forward and people need to plan accordingly. But I don't feel that I have an absolution on anything, and I think not having that has me very concerned about whatever we choose tonight. So, but I do think we have to keep talking. But those are my questions.
Thanks, Shannon. And real quick before I move to Brandy, I just wanted to thank you for your comments on social emotional health, and I think that's a great agenda item for one of our future meetings, one of our upcoming next couple of meetings on what the district is doing across the board, because I know there's been some work that's being done, and so thank you for bringing that up, and I've made a note of it, and I think that it's a great agenda item for one of our future meetings. Brandy?
So the challenge that I'm having is very similar to what Shannon just said, and I'm going to be just straight to it. I again am a huge sports fanatic. Football is my thing. Soccer, I've played my whole life. I've got a soccer family. We're big into sports. The problem that I'm having is we have outside of the football family or sports family, we have students that walk into that building who have a brother, a sister who is health compromised. And it is not their fault that we have a football team. It is not, or we have a soccer team or sports athletes. It is not their fault that we are allowing this. It is, however, their problem if their sibling gets sick or if their parents get sick or their grandparents get sick because our football team is asymptomatic or our soccer team. And I genuinely struggle because it is not their fault. Just because they were sitting in a classroom and they went with an asymptomatic football player, now they're bringing that home to their sibling or their parent or their grandparent or a stranger. And that is how, COVID continues to spread. So unless I'm confident that we can really mitigate this to a reasonable level where we can feel good, all 5 of us can feel good that the spread is relatively contained. How is it all the other students and what we're putting them through just by having this decision? I don't feel good about it either, Shannon, and I don't feel that there's a right answer. I really don't. And I want to say yes. I just want to be very clear. I want to say yes to all sports, all clubs, everything normal. I am just as much frustrated and over all of this as everybody. I mean, I think we can all agree on one thing, and that's we're all done with this. We all want to go back to normal, but normal isn't going to happen. So, given that it's not going to happen, how do we ensure the safety and health of 4,000 students and what is in all of their best interest? Not just one team, not just one club, but everybody's best interest and the health and the safety and the mental stability of everybody, even people that aren't in our district but are siblings and might have compromised health. How do we address that, I guess, in this model? And that's where I keep getting stuck. I want to say yes, I truly do. I'm still struggling.
Kevin?
I could add in a little bit on this. I think the fact of the matter is COVID isn't going away. We're living with it, right? Until a vaccine comes out. In New Hampshire, we're less than 1%. This is not considered community spread activity, regardless of football. Really has nothing to do with football. Football doesn't bring the added risk. The added risk is just as great if a young person goes to another town to visit their boyfriend or girlfriend and they kiss, okay? And then they come back to Merrimack High School tomorrow and spread it to potentially whomever. That's a risk that we take. It's very similar. And I'm a big fan of everyone should have the right to do the clubs. And those should be done in phased in approaches as well. Just like sports are being done in phased in approaches. That's unfortunately what we're going to have to do. But we're going to have to take baby steps, take that chance, see what happens, have faith in the mitigation efforts that if anything does, we're capable of catching it. And we've seen this all around the country that has a much higher percentage. They've been able to catch this and prevent the outbreaks. Whether it's a boy or girl that goes and makes out in another community and brings it back to the school, or plays soccer, or plays anything else, including football, the risk isn't there. There's been no data that has shown that football is any riskier than any of these other sports. They can say it is, but there's no data. They've had outbreaks, mini outbreaks in all types of activities. It could be soccer. It could be hockey. It could be band. It could be robotics. The robotics competitions, if I understand correctly, are regional. They all get together indoors. I'd consider that a high risk, but it's a risk that I'd want to take if I loved robotics or if that was important for my future career. So I think that's what we really need to come to the conclusion on. New Hampshire is less than 0.5% with this thing. These aren't the people spreading it. And that 0.5% predominantly comes from nursing homes. That's not where we're playing football. That's not where they play robotics. So I just think there's certain risks that we have to take, and we have to trust in the great work that all you folks have done pertaining to the safety of our schools, the mitigation efforts that we're all going through as families, and we're all in it together. We're taking that risk that my neighbors are doing the right thing, that you're doing the right thing, that I'm doing the right thing. And most of the time, I believe we are, but not all the time. That could be my wife. That could be one of my kids that either is or isn't. That's why we're all in it together. I don't think the risk is that much higher, guys. I really don't. And that's just look at the numbers. The data's the data. We're not spreading this. We've already gone through all these phases as a society around here. The issues that are happening around the country are because people didn't have phases. If you remember back, we shut down. These other places didn't. They wanted spring break. They wanted this. They wanted that. Well, they got it all right. They're in a lot of trouble right now, but they're still doing their sports, So that's what I don't think the risk is much higher. The data shows that everybody's willing to do what's right. And that's always based on good faith, just like everything right now. I go to the gym every day, and I'm dependent on the person before me cleaning the equipment and the person after, well, me cleaning it before somebody else. And I'm high risk. I'm overweight. I got high blood pressure. I could go on and on. You know, I don't want this thing. So I expect that my family's doing the right thing, just like you guys are expecting. That's what we're all in this. And we can do it. We can do it safely. We can do it intelligently. And we've put a lot of mitigation efforts in place to prevent this. There's nothing any of us can do about an asymptomatic person, whether it's an athlete, a robotics person, a soccer player, football, it makes no difference. If they show up in our environment, we can be in trouble. Nothing to do with anything we're talking about. You can't prevent it. So I really hope we can get your support to move forward. I'd much rather spend our time working on these implementation of the mitigation efforts, not only for sports, but to bring the whole community back. You know, it's time we get back to it. We've done our work. We're asking, we want to get back out there and play our sports. It's not a greater risk, specifically football, compared to anything else. So that's all I ask in good conscience, that we can do it safely, responsibly, and at this point, we should be spending the time actually implementing it. I want these games on TV on Friday night, so people that do want to stay at home, or furthermore have to stay at home, can in fact enjoy a football game. I would like seeing the police officers of our town at a game enjoying something that's so positive for community than the baloney that's been going on down at the park and everywhere else. Those are the things that discourage me. I want to get back to what we like doing as a community and bringing us all together. Whether it's football, soccer, my kids have done it all. They're all very important. That's what makes us well-rounded people. So it is super important that we help all the clubs get back, all the students that are having difficulty get back. If you guys are educators, you know this. Look in the kids' eyes. You can see it in your own kids. You can see hope, hopefully, but you can see anxiety. You can see depression. You can see uncertainty. It's our time to help them see what can get back. We can get back to this. We will beat it. Trust me. This, it's going to be a tough 6 months, and we have to be flexible in anything we do. All of the colleges, they're flexible right now. They know things can happen. And some of them kids may not behave the way they're supposed to, and then they're going to pay the price. They're going to come home to us. But I think we can do this.
I see Andy, Brandy, Shannon, and then Lori.
So, Kevin, I appreciate your comments. But the two things I want to say is, first, I apologize for bringing up two fairly controversial topics. One is about the remote learning, and one is about, is everybody on the same page? But frankly, we had to get those out there to discuss. And people that know me know I'm not gentle when I throw things out on the table. So first of all, if anybody felt I was pointing in their direction, that wasn't my style. My style is to get things out on the table to talk. I believe, based on what I'm hearing, that if we truly adhere to the protocols in place in our schools, the protocol we're going to talk about around mask wearing, the protocol around the way that everybody follows the rules, the culture that we do, if we can adhere to those, then kids playing football are no different than kids going to work in stores and things like that. If a student athlete and their parents decide to play football, then they're exposed to a certain level of risk to the same way somebody that's going, to work in a store, to work whatever. In my mind, to me, the important part is the protocols in place that we must follow to ensure the safety when kids are in school, regardless of how they're exposed. But, and I've been in this town a long time, I have concerns around whether the student athletes that are participating in sports will have that culture of truly following through to wear the mask, to do social distancing during off hours. We've all seen student athletes and high school kids get together outside of school. They get together, they do whatever they're going to do. And I want to make sure that if student athletes really want to play football, that want to go and be on TV on Friday nights and have the police be all the things that Kevin said, they've got to talk the talk. I mean, walk the walk, not just talk the talk. Because what I don't want to do is find that we as a board make the decision to allow football and find out that there's deficiencies in the way that we're handling things. I trust that Mike and the athletic department will come through with methodologies to ensure safety, to make it as safe as possible, lowest risk as possible on the football field. I trust that that's going to happen. I trust that Mark and John and everybody administration is going to do the same thing in school. But we're putting a lot of trust in the student athletes and their families and their parents to follow through on their end of the bargain here, because it is a riskier environment that we're approving, that we're considering. And for my mind, I'm willing to roll the dice and allow football to happen. But there's a huge responsibility on everybody to do the right thing here, because if one side, I mean, Kevin, you said it, if one side falls, the other gets exposed. Well, that goes true for every student athlete, every parent, every booster club activity that occurs, everything like that. When people are getting hot dogs at the football stadiums, I don't want to see people that don't believe in masks walking up and buying hot dogs in front of people, in front of student athletes. That doesn't set the priority. When booster club have activities and we have football games, everybody's got to be wearing a mask in the stands. Everybody has to wear a mask when they go to get a concession. Football players in the field know if somebody's social distancing needs a math break, they can be 6 feet or more apart. That's great. But we've got to follow through in those environments to sort of walk the walk. So I'll shut up now, but that's sort of where my head's at on this one.
Randy?
Kevin, I really appreciate everything that you said, and I don't disagree. The data is the data. The problem that I'm struggling with is not what we have for data today, but what data will look like and be during all of September and October. That's where I think all of us are struggling, and there is no crystal ball. There is no right or wrong answer here. But I agree, Andy, with everything that you said, except I would not just say that that's true for football. I would say that's true for every student and every administrator and every family member of a student, and everybody that's in our buildings or has any need to come into our buildings. I mean, and I know I'm probably stating the obvious, and I'm just wanting to go on record as saying that this responsibility is true for all of us. But it's one that not everybody believes in. It's one that we are struggling with, in our own community of everybody wearing one. And each town is a bit different too. And so when you're playing different towns, there's that layer. I am on board with allowing it as long as, and this is true for every club or every sport, as long as everybody's on the same page that if we have an outbreak of any kind, it's closed doors. We're done. As far as like season ends, and I would say that I would feel that way for football, but I would also feel that way for any sport that we have an issue with. I don't feel that we can treat football any differently, and I want to be fair to football players, but I also want to be fair for sports and for the community and for clubs. How do we do that? How do we make this fair for everybody? And I know there's probably not even a correct answer to that question. It's just a matter of I'm willing to do it if that's what the board collectively agrees to. I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page, that we would, without any issues coming forward to the board, that the team would be in support of the season ending if it got to that.
Cindy, could I just?
Yeah. Yep.
So I just want to. So some important things have just been said, and I just want to capitalize on. So first of all, so Mr. Sadowski used the word community. I stopped counting actually, and I'm grateful. But I'm not kidding. That's the key. So if he said it once, he maybe said it 20 times since he started his presentation. And that is everything. That is everything. And so then Andy rightly talked about, wanting student athletes to behave in a certain way. And I want to just reiterate what Brandy said, which is that what we've just talked about now transcends football. This is what every student needs, and every educator right now and every administrator needs to do is walk the walk. And it can't be theoretical, and it can't be that you do it and I don't have to. So just as an example, and I'm not the only one, I'm sure, but I have declined more invitations to get together with friends in the last month than I'd like, but I feel like I have an obligation to be here and to do whatever I can. So I can't see people like I'd like to. So my world has gotten pretty small, just like all of yours. So you cannot have your cake and eat it too. We've had, most of our community has been enormously respectful of what we're trying to do. But today we had 2 or 3 phone calls from people who said, I'm sending my student to school and they're not wearing a mask. So, and we have, thank goodness, the board has just decreed a policy that we can take action in that regard, not to deny an education, but to say that the education has to be remote. We all have choices. And so I just want to reiterate that whatever happens here tonight, the answer to it is going to be community. And we cannot just point fingers at the school district and say, fix it all and let everything happen and then keep us all safe. But I might just go to my party on Friday night. That's not a community's response. So I have said from day one, this is a community problem and it's going to be resolved by the community. And Andy is right that it can't just be some, it has to be a community deciding how they're going to help their district keep the schools open in this environment. And Mr. Sadowski said the word community. I stopped doing my count, but listen to what that means. That's very important tonight, very important. And no matter what the board decides on this, if it goes with football, it's going to take a community approach to keep it going. And if it decided not, then it's going to take a community to lift up those athletes and everybody else. And it's going to be a community. And, the times for, pointing fingers and blah, blah, that is not community. So I thank you, Mr. Sadowski, for so much putting a fine point on that particular issue, regardless of the outcome.
Welcome. How I feel, because we're all in it. So important. I might want to add, I saw an incredible video today from Utah, and it was on this topic. They won, they're playing in some pretty rough COVID conditions. And that, I don't know which week it was, but some people were showing up to their games. Now they're different. We're going to restrict the number of people that come. In some of these places, they have thousands of people that come. Believe it or not, there was a community initiative to fight wearing masks at the game. So people showed up at their own kids' games without masks, even though that was required. And the senior cheerleader and football player had to address the crowd beforehand and say, hey, do you remember what we agreed upon? We're out here playing. We need you guys to do your thing. This is baloney. Let us play. Let us get back to school. Let us do our thing. And I'll tell you, I'm sure the people who are not wearing masks were removed. But everybody else, the 90%ers that were there, wanted the kids to play, and the students wanted them to play. And they reminded the few adults that, hey, you made a decision. You got to stick with it. It's important. But again, their numbers aren't like ours. They're just not. So.
Shannon, and then Lori.
Thank you. I just had a couple, actually, the questions. If we did go forward and we did approve, how quick we don't have masks ordered yet for the helmets, correctly? Am I correct about that?
That's right, Shanna.
And then how long would it take for the masks to arrive?
I don't know specifically. I can get you that answer. I know they're available. I know they're reasonable. The ones that we liked were $8.50 each. And between, I think it was Mike and certainly the Booster Club, we'd be looking into acquiring those.
And then the next question is, how would they be sanitized between games?
They're washable, which is really cool. And that gets back to that responsibility. Nothing's the same. Okay, I don't know how the other sports are running, but with football, that stuff smells. Okay, and a lot of it has to come home to our houses, and we got to clean it, and we're willing to do that. It's not, nothing's the same. We're not using the locker rooms. We're not doing those things. There's a lot of concessions. That's that mitigation. So we have to clean our stuff.
Okay. And I actually, I never went to a school with a football team, and I'm a huge football fan, so it's poor planning on my parents' part. But on that note, yeah, I didn't even know if you or the school washed your uniforms. I know, like all the other sports, it was the parents, because I played high school sports, but we clearly didn't have football. But I didn't know if that was what the school was taking care of, if the student would between games. So.
No, we've always cleaned, the jerseys and stuff like that. It's this year there's a little more question about the actual equipment.
Mm-hmm.
We had to put it to dry it out, and so those are the details that we hope that you give us the approval that we can move forward to figure all these things out.
I just want
to determine.
Sorry, I just wanted to say real quick, Shannon, too. I mean, from my perspective, I had expressed my support earlier, and kind of my thought on the process is that, if we agree to go forward, then we turn it over to, the athletic director to work with administration, the parents, on what those protocols would be, what equipment's needed, if they needed, any money, to be spent for that, to come back through us. But I mean, I think that we could spend a long time talking about, all of the necessary recommendations, and I'd rather put that in the hands of the athletic director who works, with this stuff and with the parents in conjunction to how the Booster Club and the athletic director, and the coaches work together in a normal situation. Again, I would recommend the same approach for this situation.
Yeah, but my point was, if you told me that masks are available and you showed me a mask which you can't get until after the third game, then I would have a very different vote.
Gotcha.
So.
No, that makes sense.
So I can speak a little bit to that because, I obviously did some research behind that too. And I actually spoke directly with the company that Mr. Sadowski presented. And it's about a 2-week turnaround, so it's pretty quick.
Okay. I'm set.
Lori, go ahead.
Okay. Am I on mute? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're on mute now.
Sorry, you can hear me now? Sorry. I want to go back to our superintendent who made it very clear that we're all in this together. And I appreciate that Stephen's here to hear the message. You've been very respectful. I know that you're going to bring this back to your teammates, that it's really critical because we're making a very important decision tonight. And when Brandy was speaking tonight with such passion about, this is a difficult decision. This has been a decision all over the country that school boards have come together and they've had a lot of dialogue, and we take this very seriously. But we want you to be safe. And we also understand that there is the whole component of the mental, social, emotional health. And so I am going to be supporting football for student athletes in Merrimack. And I understand the importance of sports. I understand that it's a lifetime lesson, and I think students in this pandemic have learned different lessons than ever before. And we just really want the message to be really clear, though those protocols have to be followed, and we just want everyone to be safe.
Andy?
My one comment is Kevin, I certainly appreciate your passion and your standing behind this. But at the end of the day, if we approve this, I really want the athletic director and administration to be the primary voice that we hear in terms of all the protocols and all the things that are going to be done. You refer we a lot of times, and I'm assuming we as parents and we as boosters of the support of the football. I really want to make sure that we're putting this in the hands of administration, athletic director, and coaches. And I want any updates that we hear, I want to hear through them as we go through this, because at the end of the day, what we're approving is administration carrying forward. If we do approve, we're approving administration to move forward with the football program, and it's on their shoulders to make sure that it is performing properly. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about where an approval, where the responsibility would lie. I just want to be clear about that. So. Thanks.
Mike, go ahead.
So I just want to comment on that. It would be no different than any other sport that we're overseeing right now. That wouldn't change.
So, no, I understand. I mean, I just wanted to say Kevin was pretty passionate about describing things like that, and I want to make sure that you're 100% as the voice and the face into the football program through the coaches, that you're leading the effort in this and working with the team. I mean, this is weird because we didn't go through this level of rigor with any other sport, right? We're doing it with football. So I just want to make sure that everybody is clear and that you're on board, because last week we heard a little bit of a different message from you, from administration. And this is, if we do approve it, now you're taking on the responsibility and ownership of this moving forward. So that's the only reason I'm bringing it up.
So I just thank you, Andy. And so if I could just say a couple of things off of that. So, we've been talking a lot lately about how, we could, as administration, whatever, we could trip all over ourselves right now trying to do the right thing. And that could get things very complicated. So as a leadership team, we meet a lot. And we talk a lot about, what are we doing? What's our message? What are we, what's consistent, and what's, left for a building to decide, and so on. And you're talking about the same thing. It's a chain of command kind of, and I fully accept the responsibility that, we have to implement the things that the board puts in place. And you're right. When we presented 2 weeks ago, we did not recommend football. But, I want to just reiterate that that was a principled decision. And if the board, whatever decision the board makes, it will also be a principled decision, and we will support it. I mean, that goes without saying. And the we I'm referring to is administration, including Michael. So I understand where the responsibilities lie, and we will do the board's will.
Brandy, did I see your hand?
So from an athletic director perspective, would you, 2 weeks ago versus tonight, would you say that you feel that we are able to move forward with football confidently?
I have the same reservations that I had 2 weeks ago.
And Mark, do you as well?
I share Mike's, I understood Mike's rationale 2 weeks ago. I share it now. So yes, I have the same position I had before. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
But if I could just say, because I feel like that, so this is just, have we not lived through 6 months of the most awkward moments? This is an awkward moment because I know what you're probably thinking, and out of respect, you're probably thinking, well, that's weird, that you would put a decision in place that would, maybe be counter to what the athletic director and the superintendent said. But remember, you pay us to give you our best advice. That's what we try to do. That doesn't mean we're always right. It doesn't mean we're, always wrong. It just means you pay us to give you our best advice. That's what we gave you. But I do not take it as a lack of confidence. If the board comes to a different decision, you're the policymakers. So I understand my role, and so does Michael. And so, our position is what our position is. And we really will honestly work together, work with our families, work with our community to make whatever happens be the best it can be. That you have absolutely no worries about whatsoever.
I totally agree. It just weighs. It's a weight, and but either way we go. I mean, I know that you will do everything you can because that's all you've ever given to our district is the best of what you guys can offer and push, excellence in education in all ways that you guys can. And I've seen it with my own eyes, and I know that that's how all of our leadership team feels. It's just, I wish I could say that I felt 60-40 or 70-30, but I really am split so right down the middle on this, and I wish I wasn't. So I'm asking for direction from you guys as far as where you feel most comfortable, just as another point of information for me to have as I make my decision, as 1/5 of the board. So I appreciate your thoughts and comments. Kevin, I truly appreciate everything that you've said, and all of the data that you've presented. And Stephen, you've shown exactly all that I would anticipate from a senior from out of Merrimack, and certainly a football player and an athlete. You're very well spoken, and your presentation was right on point. So thank you for all of your time as well. I'm going to continue to sit and think while the other board members share where they're at.
Lori, did I see your hand earlier? No?
I think I don't know, we've talked a lot, and I know it hasn't given us a good feeling, like a great feeling about anything. We have to do the best with what we have. So on that, I will make a motion, if you are ready to entertain one, that we authorize football for the 2020 fall season, so long as the players are required to wear masks at all times during practice and games.
Do I have a second for discussion? Lori?
You muted Lori.
Mute again.
Yeah, I don't want to second it.
Okay.
All right, so I'll second it for discussion.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
So honestly, I think that the reason I'm saying for practices and games is because we want to make sure these players are conditioned to play in those conditions during a game. So, the masks are, I think, to me, giving me more than we had 2 weeks ago. It's not much more. Trust me, we want this thing gone. We are not getting this thing gone. I do think that, we as a board, when we do see a case present itself in our midst, would probably make another decision very quickly to not authorize football. But I think that when it comes down to it, I want the players to be put in the healthiest position possible. And that's why these masks are where I look at that added layer of safety. And again, for practices, so they can prepare for games with that, so that their breathing, their their management of their body temperature, all that's considered when they're wearing those masks that were mentioned. But honestly, there's no great answer. I'm just trying to find the best answer with what we have.
Lori?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So I think they can't wear them at all times. So, they're doing a phase in. So the NHIA has recommended protocols. They're following those protocols. So we don't want to change the protocols that they've already set up. I think we want to say we want them to follow the protocols as set up by the athletic director and the NHIAA. I think those are the safety protocols that we want to follow.
I mean, I have a question for Mr. Susi, and that is, does he support the use of masks?
It's a tough call because there's no data to support the use of masks mitigating anything. Could it? Sure. Could it help? Yeah, I suppose. Just like masks help in society, I suppose that they could help, but there's no data there. So, it could just be an optics thing, but I just don't know. Obviously the concern with masks is we want to make sure that they're done so in a way that certainly mitigates some risk and still provides plenty of ventilation for the student athletes to breathe during competition and practices. I think that's tremendously important because we don't want to mitigate one risk and cause another, right? And so that would be the one concern that I would have with masks. I do know that there are some teams right now that are doing their summer workouts with masks, but right now, from what I understand, they do not intend to play with them. So, for what that's worth.
And I think we had earlier discussion that a lot of those schools that will be playing have exclusive at home. They're not even going to school for instruction.
Well, yeah, for sure. Exeter is one of them. They're mandating masks during practices, but it's unlikely that they're going to utilize them in games. Pinkerton is another, but Pinkerton is going back to school in a hybrid model too. So, but they're wearing masks during practices, but I don't believe that they're going to mandate them during games. And I'm not sure what everybody else's protocols are yet. We're still in conversations with one another because one of the things that we want to do as Division I athletic directors is we want to be on the same page as much as we possibly can. And what I've been saying to all of them in my meetings with them is that we're gonna play in these cohorts. And so what we really need to do is follow the most restrictive guidelines of whoever's in our cohort, right? So there may be a school that doesn't mandate any masks, but another school in the cohort that does, then we probably all should be doing it because we want to be on the same page. So it's a balancing act.
So in that sense, it could become the prerogative of any particular district to go over and above guidelines. So it's helpful. I mean, frankly, schools have not been afforded much guidance by anybody regarding anything through this whole thing. I'm talking about from the governor to the Department of Education on that, and so we are trying to figure this out, all 122 New Hampshire school districts individually. That is the definition of insanity. There should be more guidance, and there isn't. So we're doing this ourselves, and Bedford's doing what they're doing, and NHIAA has gone on record for some things, but I think respectfully they could even be a little bit more, aggressive in their guidance. Ultimately, it's everybody for themselves and just figure it out. So I want to just reiterate what Mike just said, which is that if a cohort wants to play, they're going to respect the will of the most restrictive participant. And that gives some leeway to any individual district to do what it thinks is in the best interest of its students. And presumably the athletic directors will share that information and then follow the guidance provided by the district with the most, restrictions. So that puts a little bit of, I would think, power or comfort in any given board, this or others, to kind of go on record as what it wants. And then if another place wants to play, then they would, right, Mike? I mean,
Yeah, that's the goal. It's still ongoing discussions on that. But we really do feel pretty strongly that we need to present a united front, at least within our cohort, or any, excuse me, crossover that we might have with a team that's just outside of our cohort.
Well, on that note, then, if we are taking the lead on that, then I'd rather we did that. Honestly, when it comes to masks, we're expecting it of our students in the building. Why would we not expect it with our students on the field in close proximity to other environments that we don't manage? So that was really where I think if we could take a step forward, I think that would give me more than, we're struggling as it is, giving us something more to work with as far as one more step for safety. You're right, Mike. That's why I wanted it for practice and games, so that they can learn to breathe in those masks. And if we can cut the distance fluid goes by half its distance, it's better than nothing. Which is what no mask does. It does nothing. So I would prefer that over just going with what others are doing.
Can I just follow up just one more thing?
Sure.
Just on that? Because while we certainly want to be on the same page within our cohort with respect to the decisions that we're all making individually, the one concern that I would have with mandating masks from a cohort standpoint is that not every district might have the means with which to provide face masks to their entire football program. And so while we want to be on the same page and we're going to strive to be on the same page, it may not be possible. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that piece of it.
Understood. Thanks, Mike.
Lori?
So I have a couple things. The National Federation of High School Sport, they are not recommending masks for athletic teams. So I think that, as far as the masks go, I think we need more information. I think that's something that I would like to hear more about, but I'm not into mandating masks at this point in time, because I don't think that we have enough information if they are safe because of the breathing issues, etc.
If I could add to that is the case. They don't recommend it for breathing. If anyone had the pleasure over the weekend, all over the country in these places that have 8+% positivity rate that have agreed on football, they had their high school jamborees. These are the best players in the country that are looking at high-end colleges. And they came up with what appeared to be a happy medium. In other words, it's similar to the guidelines that are already in place, where they have to wear masks going to practice, and then after,
Right.
they have to wear masks on the sideline when they're not playing. The coaching staff has to wear masks, but when they're actually on the field, then it's kind of a choice, depending on what position you play, the visibility issues, those other things. It's like anything else. There's a little bit of, there should be some flexibility to it, but I think it's important that on sidelines, activity when they're on the edge of the field, they should be wearing them. Coaches, fans, albeit the guidelines that we've already laid out for all the sports address sitting in a family group, socially distanced. So even that, you got to kind of question, is it necessary? I'll be wearing one. I do anyways. I just think that flexibility is important in doing that.
So Shannon, could I ask you a question? Would you be comfortable moving forward with football in giving our athletic director and administration, if we approved going forward with football, let them come back with the protocols after they have a chance to kind of reconvene on what they would recommend.
I do it hesitantly, but I think I'd be more quick to shut down the program if there's any sign of it.
I'm sorry, I missed part of that.
If we're not taking every step we can to avoid it, then I'm less comfortable. So the mask was that comfort level that got me over that 50%. So I have a harder time with it. I'm not gonna lie to you, but we'll have to have, COVID stats on every agenda, and if we have to meet, I would adjust my motion, but I would say this, that I would authorize the football season, encouraging masks and canceling the rest of the season upon the first positive COVID case. I just can't keep going back and forth and risking. I'm saying we can't keep doing, but it's hard enough. But if we end up presenting positive, what next? Because they're all in proximity. So that's my challenge.
Is that an update to your motion or is that a comment?
I'll make an update to the motion.
Okay. I second.
Okay.
Andy? And then Lori.
So I think the protocols are in place of how to handle if a positive is in place, right? I don't think it's cancel the whole season.
Right.
I think there's protocols in place to, depending on the level of exposure, there is either quarantine people or maybe the team doesn't play the game. I don't have them in front of me, but I wouldn't be in support of canceling the whole season. I would default to the protocols that the NHAIA and the coaches have put together, because I think they do account for in the case of a positive case. So anyway, that's my thought.
Reserving our rights to cancel the season if the board determines that's what it.
Well, but I wouldn't limit it to a positive case, because if it's one positive case and it can be managed with the protocols in place, just like in school, then I'd hate to say it's the same argument as a student not wearing a mask. I had trouble if the student didn't wear a mask, then he was kicked out of school. Remember, I had concerns about that, and Mark said we would use the right judgment and all that stuff. Well, I want the same thing here. If there's a positive case, but it can be managed properly, I don't want to just say cancel the whole season if one case is there. I mean, if we see more thought out, I'd want to have it brought back in and talk about it. But just one positive case, I think, is a little too restrictive. But
well, I think the concern with my motion, Andy, is the fact that it was presented to us last week that this is the highest risk, closest proximity of all the sports. It was treated differently because it was different, not because it was the same as the others, because it was different. It had a higher level of interaction. And my dog, someone must be getting home. I'm sorry. But those are my concerns. That data was presented to us already, that it's the high risk of all the sports, that and cheer. So,
but that being said, the guidelines in the sports things cover that higher risk exposure. There's a separate category altogether for how that's handled. So it's there for a reason. So I was going to rely on it to handle it.
So I'll adjust my motion to say I think the board should authorize football encouraging masks. Would you go a second to that?
Second that. And then I saw Mike Susie and then Lori.
So the one comment that I would have with respect to a positive case is that I want to apply kind of a reverse model to it. If a team that we were playing had a positive case, would we want to send our kids to play that community?
May I just jump in for a second here?
Sure. Yeah.
And so this is where there's beginning to be a parallel between the experience of football or any sport and just plain old life in school now. So the same questions that you're asking now theoretically could apply to our schooling. And so this is where it gets very tricky. So we want to talk about data, and this relates, so I'll just allow me for a minute, but if we want to talk about data, in March, on the day that I said March 13th, we're done, there wasn't a single case of COVID in Merrimack, and there were 4 new cases that day in the state. So if we went on data, we would not have shut school down on March 13th. Let's be honest. The reason we shut down school is that the community concern was to a point where it was no longer sustainable. Data didn't drive that decision. I mean, I'm trying to be as real with you all as I can. Go back and look. March 13th and the weeks leading up to that, after February vacation, there was no data-driven reason to shut down schools. But the community had reached a fever pitch, understandably so. I'm not blaming, I'm just acknowledging a fact. I lived it. And so my point throughout the summer has been, things got worse in late March and April and May, and now they've gotten better, but there were 30 cases in New Hampshire on Sunday reported. That's higher than we ever were in March 2nd to March 13th. So that data point alone would suggest that we're in a slightly different place. So my point is that not just football would be subject to those same questions, but our academics would be subject to those same questions. And the question that I'm going to be faced with, I fear, is what will the community's tolerance be for one positive case in a classroom? So here we are talking about data. The data would suggest you contact trace and you ask, was that person closer than 6 feet? Well, our entire program is based on social distancing. Were you within 6 feet and without a mask? Well, we've got a mask mandate. And was it for longer than 10 minutes? Those are the questions that are asked. So in a case of a positive case of a teacher or a student, we will find out those questions. And if the answer is no to all of that, and that individual gets quarantined, my question is, what will the community's tolerance level be for continuing under those conditions? Right? So I'm just trying to point out the reality as I'm living it, that we can talk about data and then we can talk about emotion. And I have experienced firsthand how those two things do not always intersect. So I would say I wouldn't isolate football, particularly from any other experience that we're going to have over the next couple of weeks, or for that matter, any sport. I wouldn't necessarily put any sport at more of an obligation to cancel or not cancel, whatever, than I would about our own academic programs. And I'm just trying to say that we're going to all, again, to Mr. Sadowski's point, as a community, have to grapple. We're going way beyond sports right now. And we're talking about how is our community going to handle those realities when they happen. And so I will be encouraged to follow data up to the point when it becomes a concern of an individual for my child and my experience, and then maybe data goes out the window. So I want to reiterate, what have we tried to do? We have tried to acknowledge that there is risk. The minute we said we're going hybrid, I acknowledged risk. The least risky thing would have been to say remote. But the community didn't really support that, and our leadership team didn't really support that. We want students. So there's an acceptable risk right off the bat. And so what we've tried to do is assess, what is an acceptable risk? So, when you see a carpet turned up in the library, you say, well, what's the likelihood that kids are going to trip on that? So we can just, not replace that for a while. Well, until one kid trips, and then they said, wow, there was a bump in the carpet. You knew about it. Why didn't you fix it? Well, that's why we come to the board and we say we've got a rip in the carpet. We need it fixed, because that's not a risk we want to take, because it could happen. So what I'm trying to point out is that the unknown here is, again, what could happen and what's an acceptable risk. So I would say that if we're going to, in this particular context, if we're going to move ahead with this particular sport, then we try to minimize the known risks in any way we can. And as Mike pointed out, what that means sometimes is that you trade one risk for another. And you know, that becomes a point of almost diminishing returns. But I don't know why we would treat this differently than we treat any other thing where we have a known potential danger, and we do whatever we can to mitigate it. And we don't say, well, in a building of 600 people, the likelihood that more than 4 or 5 will trip on that bump, so let's not do it. We don't do that. So why would we do that in this case? I guess is what I want to sort of ask. So if the motion is to play football and it includes an additional request that speaks to safety, I don't know why. I mean, I'm just saying, I don't know why we wouldn't necessarily try to support that in the spirit of trying to accomplish the goal of playing up against the goal of mitigating a known risk. How great a risk? Anybody's guess, but it's a risk. Just like going to school is a risk, and we've done everything we can to mitigate that. Everything we can think of to mitigate that. Matt has worked, night and day to accomplish that goal. So I feel confident saying, come back. I mean it. I really, come back. We're looking forward to people back, and we think it'll be safe. But we really have tried to leave no stone unturned. So there's the parallel that I share with you regarding this particular motion.
Or any other comments? Lori?
So I just want to get Shannon's motion straight. So she's saying that we're going to allow football in 2020 with proper safety protocols in place.
Encouraging masks.
And encouraging mask.
Any other comments before we take a vote? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None. The motion carries 5-0-0.
Go Hawks.
So I just want to thank you, Stephen and Kevin, for your time. And we really wish you the most successful football season.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We're going to do this responsibly, respectfully, and successfully. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Good luck with the other decisions. I know they're difficult.
Okay, thanks. Have a good night. All right. So moving on to the reopening update, Mark McLaughlin.
So interestingly, throughout the course of the football conversation, there actually were kind of inadvertent updates. I shared with you some of the challenges that we're encountering, which aren't unexpected at this moment. I'm going to particularly around people acclimating to the mask policy and the issue of trying to develop schedules. So I'm going to get to that in a few minutes, but I just maybe turn to John briefly. Tomorrow is a big day in our district because our teachers were back today, and John and Matt and I were saying what a delight it was to actually see cars in parking lots with real people attached to them. And so we have a program of professional development starting tomorrow. So John, maybe you could just speak to that.
Certainly. Thank you. And what a full discussion that was. I just want to follow it up by saying tomorrow morning, all the educators in our district will begin with an address from Mark, Matt, and I bright and early. So on a few hours sleep, we'll get up and start that address tomorrow. And then in the buildings, there'll be a myriad of things happening throughout the rest of the week. And First and foremost, it's going to be creating a community again in our schools and looking at the social emotional well-being of all of our staff and our students. I think that's at the forefront of our thinking as we enter tomorrow. And then there's a lot of discussion around our essential learning competencies. I spoke to those many times at the board's level. We'll be taking those and expanding those and looking at assessments and really expanding on our first 2 weeks and developing plans for that. There'll be some work done around platforms and how we will be moving, rolling towards Canvas and kind of preparing ourselves for that to happen. We'll again look at our materials and our resources and try to come up with common themes on what we're going to be using for online applications. We wanted, I spoke to before, when we first began this, it was that emergency teaching mode, and we were grabbing and grasping from everywhere to get our lessons home to students. And I think that we've become much more organized about that effort over the last 3 months. And we're going to do some more work about kind of what that design looks like over the next 3 weeks. Well, again, looking at the high school, there's going to be an extended homeroom, and they'll spend some time working on what does that look like and how will we do that. We'll spend some time at our high school around our common formatives we're doing to see where kids are and where they're at. At the elementary school, we'll be spending some time with some meet and greets and some opportunities for families to come into the schools. So that's just a kind of snapshot of where we are. And of course, UDL will be present throughout all of our discussions, and we'll work towards creating an environment where both our staff is more prepared than they are today. And we, like I said to Mark today, as we walked through and we actually saw real live educators in their buildings preparing, that I can't wait to be front and center next Wednesday when those first students walk through the doors. It's going to be a joy for all of us to see it happen. So thank you, Mark.
So thanks, John. That is, it's a tremendous amount of work to put that together in, again, under the conditions that we have to do it. One thing that is gonna, and just to build on what John said, one thing that it's very important for folks to know is that John and his team have, and that team has been pretty big. It's been just tons of teachers who've given up so much of their summer, along with our administrators, who have put these things together to be ready for both hybrid and remote learning. But it hasn't been everybody necessarily. So it hasn't been everybody. And so this week is really designed to bring all those other people up to speed, which is why we're grateful that the board extended the start time of school to the 9th, because it provides that necessary time. But it's going to be time full and time well spent. In the next couple of days, we're going to have information for parents about how we're going to tackle the issue of attendance. But just for the purposes of tonight, I want to be very clear. The situation that happened to us in the spring was pretty shocking, and it came really fast. And so both teachers and administrators, parents and students all really needed to kind of work together and be very flexible. And so we were very flexible on attendance in the spring, because people were literally grappling with something they'd never grappled with before. But we want to be really clear. School is back. School is back. And whether you're a fully hybrid, whether you're a hybrid student or a fully remote student, you're back. And part of being back is being responsible for your learning, as we have to be responsible for our teaching. And so we'll be providing our community some expectations around attendance coming up, but it's predicated on the idea that school is back, and it's going to be more rigorous and more real probably than it felt in the spring. So that's one thing. The other thing I just want to talk about is the challenge of scheduling. Throughout the summer, we've had kind of a chicken and egg problem which is that on July 13th, when we went before the board, and we're really one of the first districts in the state to let the board know what our plan was, hybrid. We did it then because we wanted our families to have as much notice as possible so they could plan. And at the time, we asked for people to fill out a survey to say, so which is it, hybrid or remote? And understandably, at that time, families felt that they lacked some information. It's true. We have used the entire summer to try to fill in the holes. I've said to you at different board meetings that we've got a puzzle and we're piecing it together, and we have a frame, and every day the picture gets a little bit fuller. But in the meantime, while parents and families rightfully wanted more information so that they could make their decision, we had to wait in order to get certain things in place until we knew what people's decisions were. So then we issued another survey at the end of July and had it be due at the beginning of August that said, now we really have to know. And so our families responded. And frequently throughout that period, people would say, can we change our mind? And I said then, as I say now, the answer is yes. However, what everyone needs to understand is that a system as complex as a school district cannot be put together under conditions like this with constantly changing updates to things as fundamental as where you're going to do your learning. And so we have had to put a moratorium on changes to remote or hybrid. And I recognize that has caused some concern for some people. And some people have said, well, you know, Mr. McLaughlin, kind of both sides of your mouth, because you said we could change our mind. Well, what I am saying is that at the moment, we have to allow our staff enough, our administrative team, enough stability to be able to match teachers with students. And that has to happen now, or we'll have to come to you and say we have to postpone school. Now, that doesn't mean that after we get those schedules in place, that we certainly cannot entertain, as we've said all along, options. We've always said, if your family conditions change and you need this now rather than that, we will work with you. But right now, we have to build a schedule. And anybody who has run an organization or hasn't can imagine how complicated that is. And there have to be some known knowns. And recall that the other complication is our teachers, who by right and law have the opportunity to express where they're going to work as well. So now imagine all those moving parts and all the moving parts of our families. And unless we put a stake in the ground and say, right now, we just need to know what you're doing so that we can build a schedule and then work off of that, then if we can't do that, then I will have to come to you and say, we're not ready for school. And I don't want to do that. So I would also point out that districts, some districts have been much more aggressive than Merrimack has. They have told their communities, maybe as much as a month or 2 months ago, make your decision now. We have been very flexible with our community, and I'm glad for it, to allow them to contemplate, to listen to updated information and make a decision. And if you look at the calendar, the moratorium was 5 o'clock today for the high school. Look at the date. This is August 31st. And school starts in a week. So I just would say, I think we try to be quite generous about affording people ample opportunity to make decisions and to have time to do it. And it's a temporary moratorium. We've got to build schedules, and then we can entertain changes as needs be, understanding that this is a very fragile, complicated match between where teachers are going to be teaching and under what conditions, and where students are going to be learning and under what conditions. And with all that choice, which is our right, your right, and our pleasure to provide, at some point the system needs to be accounted for and say, okay, now we need to just build. So that's where we're at now. And I feel confident that we are in good shape. But to say that our teams are working around the clock is almost not an exaggeration. And I would hope that our community, when they see their teachers or counselors or administrators, would just offer a quick thanks to them for their willingness to do that in accommodation of in recognition of the accommodation that we've tried to afford people to make these decisions. So that's the reality at the moment. We are incredibly excited to see our teachers tomorrow. And that is no lie. We said to the people we saw today, don't know about tomorrow, but we take each day as it comes, and today was a good day, and tomorrow will be too. And then next Wednesday will be, and then the following Monday, when we start to have students live, it's going to be about the best time this district's seen in a while. So we are optimistic and very excited, and good things are on the way. And so on the night before teachers really come back in earnest, we're feeling good. So that's our update.
Thank you. Questions from the board? I just have one. Oh, Shannon, go ahead.
I did. It actually goes back to our last agenda item, and I know that we talked a bit about, when I first brought up about student athletes being remote and how it wasn't as good of an option. But now we will have people remote. And it's last I checked, the data was about 19% was the last data point we had. Of course, it sounds like you've had some adjustments in those numbers. But, how are we going to try to get them up to par with those who are able to elect hybrid? And I'm saying that because I think, people aren't necessarily choosing remote because they want to. They're doing it because they don't feel safe, or they have a reason not to feel safe because of a underlying health condition. So how are we, I know it's going to be better than it was in the spring because that we've had time to prepare, and I do understand all of those things. But as we're talking about preparing our teachers who are going to be teaching remote students, how are we going to make those extensions so that they meet the as close to the hybrid as possible? And if it doesn't, how can we measure the delta?
So I'm going to turn to John. He's been working on that all summer and providing periodic updates to the community and the board. But John, just you well positioned to take that one.
So there's a lot there, Shannon. It's a big question. So it's I think it all comes back to the instructional model that I've shared multiple times, and I don't have it right now to pull up again on my screen, but it comes down. It starts with our it starts with our formative our common assessments, and it starts with our, even before that, our ELCs. It starts with those competencies. How does it start? How do we all have the same things at the same level in the same areas that we're teaching? And that's been done, which is a feat. That's been done since the start. We've had over 200 educators working on this to create them in all areas pre-K through 12. And that is the foundation now for our learning. And those eventually will be posted up on we're doing the final tweaks as we talk about them, and then we'll have those posted up on our website so they're common and everyone can see them. And then it comes down to, okay, now once we have those, what's our instructional plan? How are we having scope and sequence? And how is that going to happen throughout learning, if it's hybrid or remote? It's the same scope and sequence that will be laid out for both. And then once that's done, how are we assessing? What are our formatives and our summative assessments? Those have to be common. If I have English 9, they're the same formative and common assessments I'm using in the English 9 in a hybrid, in the English 9 in a remote. That's going to happen. Then how are we grading? What is our grading practice? That has to be common along that. So by building that structure around the rigor and the common practices, the common tools, using Canvas as the platform and how we turn things in, All of that in place creates that parity you're asking about. How does it work the same in hybrid and remote with all those functional tools in place? And there has to be opportunities for our administrative team. One of the things that we've done is responsibilities of the educators, responsibility of students, responsibility of the administration. And that went out to them today. And really their responsibilities is to monitor this as they would a teacher in a classroom. They have to be checking in and monitoring those teachers that are remote as well. And that's how we create an equal system of that happening.
So there's been, so that, and John just gave you a very, very quick summary, and it might give you the, you know, it belies the huge feat. I mean, to develop what John's team has developed in the time that we've had with the people that we've had and haven't had is huge. And this is not just slapdash work. This is quality work, and it applies to students who are both hybrid and remote. So there is not, you know, a two-tier set of expectations there. There has been, I just would openly acknowledge, there have been some questions that have been raised about the availability of some courses for students in hybrid at the high school versus remote at the high school. And so what is very important for the board and the community to understand is that the high school team has moved mountains to provide as many level alternatives to remote students as is possible by the numbers, and in those cases where we're not able to do that, the high school has provided. We have bought licenses for virtual high school. We have VLACs. We have offered assistance to have our staff help with getting set up in those areas. But I would just point out that there has been a lot of work to make sure that we can provide as much equality between the remote experience and the hybrid experience. But again, this might not please people to hear, but this is a reality, that we have a finite number of staff and a finite number of students. And within that, and I think probably Mrs. Rothaus particularly would know, given her background, you know, you can only do so much with a schedule. And when you have all the variables that are in place. Now, we have got 80% of students who want hybrid. So, you know, so we have to schedule according to that, right? And we have to schedule according to those who've chosen remote. And we don't have 500 teachers. We don't. We have the teachers we have. And they are limited themselves by what they're able to do by virtue of their own health or that of their families or their childcare. And so, when Mrs. Putney came before the board some time ago with her team, and she talked about a pathway to graduation, remember what she said. Our obligation at a minimum is to make sure that every Merrimack student has the means by which they can take courses that lead to graduation, and they can. And on top of that, we have a wide variety of level choices for both hybrid students and remote students. But it is also a fact, as I said earlier, that this is not a time where we can have our cake and eat it too. There are choices that had to be made, not because we are trying to disadvantage one group over another. We don't love our soccer people more than our football people. We don't love our hybrid people more than our remote people, but there's just a limit to what the system will allow. That's just a fact. And so within that, I credit the high school team for all of its work, both initially and subsequently to their presentation to the board a few weeks ago, to try to embed honors courses in pre-existing courses, to provide opportunities for standalone remote courses that hadn't been available before. and to provide opportunities through licenses to outside agents who can fill in those holes. So, so the question that Shannon, you asked has to do with, what are we doing to make sure that there is, some equity between, and I mean, we are trying to move mountains to make that possible. But once again, back to the community, I'm hoping, can understand that the system, has certain limitations just by virtue of the multiplicity of variables that we're playing with right now. But within that, we are not giving up and saying, oh, well, deal. Mrs. Putney and her team, literally, it's night and day. So that's the answer. We are trying very hard to make sure that our remote students, and the first thing I think that Mrs. Putney said, if you remember, is she wants the high school to be the true north. She wants the high school to be the place where every student feels a home, even if their academic life for the moment is in their own home. But the high school is their place. And that's how she led her presentation a few weeks ago. And that is as true today as it was then.
Did I see Lori?
All I was going to say is that, the online learning for a lot of students, it is a high quality learning. There are some students that really thrive in online, and research shows, especially college students do equally well. So I think by, offering the school district, offering families the choice, and then giving that they choose that choice doesn't mean that they're going to get less. They actually, in some cases, they could learn some skills that would help them in the future when they do go to college. And then finally, I think that the work that our administrators have done is phenomenal. And when you look at where we are and the vision, because this vision started in June and July to get us to where we are. And it's, I think I'm just deeply appreciate the amount of work and how we are really trying to give students multiple pathways. We're being innovative. We're really trying to reach every student. I think that's very important.
And I don't disagree with anything. I think that, we are in a fluid environment, and, how we're managing this, being able to measure it is so important. As I mentioned in my question, I don't think a lot of our 20% who are staying at home are choosing to stay at home. They're needing to stay at home. It's, so for them, making sure that they feel they've gotten the opportunity for the same education, the same pathways, not to graduation. And you're right, there's going to be some sacrifice, but when it comes to it, I look at, what if the class valedictorian was the one who couldn't get access to the best classes, and that kept them from the college of their choice. It's like, I know we're in like a really serious situation, but when you're talking about academics and, making sure that the rigor is there, the content is there, the access to the right courses to get them to their end result. But if our class valedictorian had a lung disease, would that keep them from getting to that next place, or do they put themselves at risk to get access to that content to be able to graduate to their fullest potential? So that's always been, I don't know how we can vet this. We have to vet this publicly. I mean, we have to kind of really think this through in so many ways, because it's just so, who we're dealing with is, there are numbers right now, but I know that there's definitely individual learning goals attached to each one of those numbers, and how are we doing that? And just keep reminding us and advising us on how that's going. So that's really where I'm at.
John?
I can just speak to that. Was the reason for contracting with virtual high school, for that exact reason you just said. and it's not the same. It's not our teachers with direct instruction that we have at Merrimack High School, but it is. They've been doing this for a long time.
Is Virtual High School different than VLAX? Could you just clarify that for me, please?
No, VLAX is one thing. That's the state. That's the state virtual high school, and then Virtual High School is an independent company. They're. You've heard of Plato. You've heard of Keystone. You've heard of American School. It's another vendor, and they have longevity in Merrimack. Actually, we used to utilize them when we had an actual room in the high school about 15 years ago. They actually taught virtual high school, so we had that as part of our thing. So we went back to that road knowing that they were quality and that we had a relationship with them. So we actually contracted with them to allow for higher level classes that we may not have been able to offer. And for that student you talked about that had other goals, we created another avenue that we didn't have before. And that was what our thinking was, exactly where you were, Shannon, around that parity and how do we create that in another way. So VLAX classes have been overwhelmed. I mean, they've expanded as fast as they can. They've taken in kids from all over. Some districts didn't have options of remote. They said their remote was VLAX. So there was a huge jump right at that right away. So a lot of those classes on VLAX, which is a state-run organization, filled up right away. We knew that when the longer this took us for making choice about what we were doing, as those days were going by, Mark mentioned that, we left choice for people to say, do you want to come remote? Do you want to come hybrid? In that time, tick, tick, tick was happening, and those classes were filling up. And we knew that. So some of this was the VLAX classes did fill. So that's when we got creative and called vendors and came up with a contract with a vendor that will allow us to have our students access those classes. And that's why to have another option, if we couldn't offer it remotely, well, then there was an option to have that course, that level of rigor they were hoping to have at another venue.
And just to be clear, to build on John's point, VLAX has added courses, and so when Mrs. Putney put out a message over the weekend, she and John had done their due diligence to be sure they knew what VLAX classes were available again, because they had added, and we provided that guidance. So it's not just virtual high school that families will have access to. It will be VLAX as well, in addition to our own modifications to our own existing program of studies, where we're able to add, an honors component for those who, pre-registered for them. And so, all of that combined and we're just talking about the high school, but it's not, just the high school. There's a lot of people who are remote, across the district, and we take the same approach with all of them. But at the risk of, I don't know how else to say this, and I'm weary from 6 months of just this. I just would say that the problem here is a pandemic that isn't seeming to go away, and so it has forced all schools into a very tough reality, and it can't be right now exactly as we all wish it would be, a one-to-one correspondence. That is not from a lack of effort or a lack of caring, but I've always said, I'm going to try to be as realistic as I can, and we are trying our best to work within a reality, a deck of cards that's been handed to us, and do our best within that. But we can't pretend as if this isn't having an impact on our operations. I think we've said over the since March 13th, we've shown this has an impact on our operations. And as much as we want to, create a system where it's like, this isn't happening, it is happening. And there are realities to it. And we have to be honest about what they are and transparent about what they are, and then as proactive as we can be to address them. But the nature of this problem has created certain inequities just by the fact that some people have gotten sick and worse and some people haven't, and that's inherently inequitable, and none of us can travel, and that's inequitable. And I mean, that is the basis of our existence at the moment. And within that, we're trying very hard to create as much as we can so that all of our students, for whatever reasons they're doing what they're doing, are included and supported to the best of our ability.
Thank you.
Anything else, Shannon?
No, I'm good.
Okay, anyone else? All right, let's go ahead and move on to item number 5, the third review of approval of non-discrimination, equal opportunity employment in district anti-discrimination plan policy. Mark McLaughlin.
So thank you. So at last board meeting, I brought the second reading to the board, and some board members had a couple of requests. And so you see those in yellow. The first I'll point out is in under the statement of purpose. It was asked if we could include the word all so that we are sure that this applies to all students, and then also not just isolate staff and assume that people understood that that meant teachers. So we added the word teachers as well. So it now reads, as a public school system, the Merrimack School District affirms its commitment to creating and supporting the conditions for inclusion, acceptance, and fair and equal treatment for all students, teachers, and staff with respect to all operations of and within the district. And then on page 3 of 5, under F, complaint and reporting procedures, there was a question, not a concern really, but a question raised as to whether or not the wording could be a little bit more general, so as not to suggest that a bystander could only tell an administrator if they saw objectionable behavior. So I'll read the changed language. Additionally, employees who observe an incident of harassment or bullying have a responsibility to intervene to stop the conduct, assuming conditions in which it is safe to do so. If an employee knows of an incident involving discrimination, harassment, or bullying, and the employee is found after a complete investigation to have failed to report the conduct, to have failed to take proper action with regard to the incident, or to have knowingly provided false information in regard to the incident, the employee will be subject to disciplinary action up to and including dismissal. So really what we've done is we've taken out the supervisory reference so that if you're a bystander observing, if as long as it's safe to do so, meaning, that you can, that there's not an active situation where you need to, sort of get cover or what have you, but assuming it's safe to do so, that your expectation is that you would. And so I believe that for this, that was what the board had raised. And so I offer that for your approval.
Any comments from the board? Andy?
My only comment is in that yellowed out section where you had things saying complete investigation to fail to report the conduct, to have failed to take, you're missing a comment there. Just make sure that you.
Oh, thank you.
Where the or is crossed out, there probably should be a comma there to separate the thoughts.
Yeah,
other than that, I'm good. I'm good.
Thank you.
So, Shannon?
Just wanted to make sure that with the adjustments, it was reviewed by legal counsel.
Shannon, I apologize. I didn't hear that.
With the adjustments made to tonight's copy, it was reviewed by legal counsel?
Everything, yes. Everything always, even with changes, goes before legal again. Okay. Just make sure that in our effort to make a fix that we're not running afoul of something we don't anticipate. So yes.
Appreciate it. Okay. So if there aren't questions, if you need a motion, because this is our third reading. So if there are going to be no other changes, I would be comfortable with putting this forward tonight.
I have no problem putting this forward tonight. Unless we wanted to put it on consent for our next school board meeting, and then if anyone wanted to pull it, fine. Otherwise, we could just let it go to consent.
Andy?
I'm good with taking action tonight.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so
A motion?
I will move that we accept this policy AC, non-discrimination, equal opportunity employment and district anti-discrimination plan as presented with the one editorial adjustment.
I second.
All right, Lori, any comments? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, the motion carries 5-0-0.
That is a very big deal, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. So moving on to item number 6, which is the second review of communicable and infectious disease. CBC.
So in this one, a couple of things. One, it was raised if we could itemize the pathogens, or maybe the 5 pathogens. And so to Shannon's question a minute ago, everything that gets, policy goes, before legal again. And their advice was to not include that language because and this is related to, in a way, what we've talked about sometime before. Their goal is the legal's goal is to keep policies clear enough, specific enough so that they're clear, but not so specific as to negate other possibilities. So their advice was that the reference to pathogens is more a way to communicate that whatever causes disease is the thing that this policy is the subject of, and that they just thought it might be somewhat confusing and or limiting to name them. So I raised it, and that was their advice, and so that's why here you don't see them identified. Further down in the second paragraph, starting RSA 200:39, it was raised to replace AIDS with HIV and to add COVID-19 among the list of diseases, which it says are not necessarily limited to. So it names some, but what the legal team wants to be clear is that even though some are listed, it's not necessarily exclusive to just these. So this illness relates, more broadly than to just those that are named. But the suggestion for replacing AIDS with HIV and adding COVID-19 was approved and added. And that, I think, was everything for that policy.
Any questions, comments from the board? Do you want to take a vote on that, or do we want to move that to consent for our next meeting? Shannon?
I think we should move the next 2 to consent because this is only our second review of the policy.
Okay, that works for me. Does that sound good to everyone else? Okay. All right, so moving on to agenda item number 7. It's the second review, temporary emergency policy, travel guidance for students and staff.
Yep. And so I would just draw your attention to page 2 of 2 under students. And there's just a little clarity here, so I'll read it. The parent of any student whose travel will require the student to quarantine upon return, which will result in missed in-person instruction, must report the anticipated travel to the building administrator as soon as possible in advance of said travel. So really, it's just the elimination of a couple of words and the addition of a few, just to try to be more clear about the intent of the policy as regard to the impact of parental travel on students. And, so I'll leave it at that for now.
Questions or comments from the board? All right, Okay, go ahead, Andy. And then Shannon?
I don't know, Cinda, what you and I had sort of talked one-on-one about other references within this document. Were you going to bring that up? Do you want me to bring that up?
No, you can bring up what you found for sure.
Yeah, so one of the things that, so we got feedback from parents. I got feedback directly from a parent about situations around things like college visits and things like that that would be coming up, and that the policy, the way that it's written, would require that anytime a student or left New England and came back, they would automatically go into a two-week quarantine period because they left New England. One of the things that I did to sort of backtrack a little bit was look at the back to school guidance and see what it said about students and stuff. And it interestingly talked about 14 days, but then it had this this note, and I'll read it to you. It says, because of the because the COVID-19 pandemic is rapidly changing, school officials should check with the New Hampshire Department of Public Health and the DOE to ensure that schools are using the most up-to-date travel risk factor screening questions, which can change over time. Now, those are listed in the Safer at Home document, which has this things called universal guidelines. And it is the document that appears to be the thing that is being updated regularly, and to the fact that there is an update that was just issued on the 27th of August. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen really quick and share what it says, because I think it's sort of pertinent to the conversation that we have. So if you could tell me when you can see this.
We can see it.
So this is the document for the, I'll just go to the top so you can see it. This is the Safer at Home Universal Guidelines. So if you go to newhampshire.gov and you go to the COVID-19 page, this is the overarching for employers, employees, but it also it's really the guidelines for any sort of person that's working in the state or participating. They talk about volunteers, they talk about other things. I'm going to go down to something that is actually new in this update. That is a table that talks about the requirements, and it's got a table that talks about the situation for the individual going from a household contact of COVID, a non-household contact with COVID, traveled outside New England, traveled within New England, and then you've got new or unexplained symptom and asymptomatic or tested positive. So if we look at the asymptomatic, assuming that somebody who's left the state and has traveled outside of New England, you get into this quadrant that says self-quarantine for 14 days from the last day of travel, which is what our policy says, right? But then it's got this little thing called unless essential travel. So if I go back up in the document, and I've highlighted it here, essential travel includes personal safety, medical care, care of others, parental shared custody for food, beverage, or medication, or for work. Employees who travel outside the New England states for personal or leisure reasons cannot rely on this exemption. So one of the things that I want us to decide is this is sort of, in my mind, this is the backbone for what we do and what we're going to say with this policy, because it's the stuff that the state is. It's not the wide CDC. It's not the opinion of the the state opinion. I can't say the word. It's too late. I apologize. Dr. Chen, who's in the state level, right? This is what's written and what we have to rely on. And this document will evolve over time. This could be more restrictive over time. It could be less restrictive over time. So in my mind, first, what we say is pretty darn close to what's in this document. I think we should refer to this document on the universal guidelines and talk about things around essential travel. And then what we're going to need to figure out in terms, and this is probably not the policy, but the implementation, how we define some of these things, because it does make exceptions for travel that needs to occur where it isn't just going on a vacation or something like this, right? So I just wanted to call people's attention to this, because this is something that's actually changed a bit since we did our last reading. And again, this was updated. You can see on the bottom of the page, updated August 27th of this year. So I'll stop there.
So thanks, Andy. Just real quick, just to kind of continue on that point. I was struggling to find out really, when I was looking at the link that we had, is that really the true guidance, and where did that come from, right? Was it from the executive order? Was it, where was the governing body that had, made this policy? Because the intent of the policy is that essentially we want to take the guidance that's given to the state and then internalize it to promote the safety for our staff and our students and our school community and our overall community as well, but not to create our own policy that we're simply trying to work with the guidelines we've been given by the state. So in that, I went to the governor's side. I wrote to the governor's task force on reopening the economy. I heard from Lorna, who's I believe a community relations person or communications person. And she stated to me in an email that, she referred to the universal guidance, and again, used that term, that exact, I think it was the universal guidance. And she said that a couple times in the email to me, and that, she confirmed for me that all Granite Staters are asked to follow the universal guidance and the sector specific guidance the state has issued to mitigate and prevent the spread of COVID-19. So given that, and given the reference to the universal guidance, I feel like that's actually the governing document that we're trying to reference in this policy. And along the same vein, that something in the policy will provide the flexibility and adaptability that real time as those universal guidance document changes, that as a school community, we continue to follow those, and that the policy somehow reflects the agility to be able to do so. So I saw Shannon. No. So I don't know if you can take that back to the attorney, Mark, and
I apologize, Cinda. Yes, I absolutely can. I absolutely can do that. I thought somebody was speaking. No, I absolutely can do that and will do that. So I presume then that I would bring this back to the board on September 8th.
Yeah.
Which is our next board meeting.
Any other comments from the board, Andy?
Yeah, so I mean, just to follow up, I think what we need to be clear is how, if a parent has to take their student someplace outside of New England, how we categorize certain things, because there is specific work-centric items that are listed there. And things that are commonly coming up are things like college visitations and stuff like that. And I think we need to decide whether we lump that into just they're taking a visit or whatever, or informal, or whether it's something related. I mean, I don't have the right answer to it. I just know that it's going to get asked depending on the policy. So I like the redirection to this document that the state is updating regularly. I think that's really good, and we don't want to be more or less restrictive than the state, but the interpretation of what that says, I think we may need to provide guidance on within our policy. But that's just my thought.
Mark?
So Andy, thank you, by the way, for that. That's very helpful. It's updated, and I really appreciate it. So yeah, I can between now and the next board meeting, I can work with them, the legal team, on that language, and then to redirect to the universal guidelines, and then to try to get clarity. I think in the meantime, though, probably some anticipation of what probably will, if this is some version of this is what the board would take under advisement and then do, we have to talk about what the anticipation of that. And the spirit of this is very much aligned to what we're asking of our employees. And that is that, again, it's just a broken record, but so much of tonight has been kind of, we've been talking about similar things. So, with Mr. Sadowski earlier, we talked about community. Right now, we have to have our community supporting our schools. And so in the same way that we're asking our staff to report when they travel outside of New England per state guidelines, why would we do that? Because the ability to control spread is limited when people go outside of New England. And so students are people. And so the it applies broadly so that we can maintain, be each other's, have each other's back. Literally, if ever there was a time when that expression counted, now is that time. And so again, I'm in that boat. I have a senior who is going to be looking at schools, and we've talked about if my wife or I need to travel with him, then he's going to have to learn, well, actually in Nashua he will for the time being be learning remotely, but that means that I have to make a choice. Either I go with him or I don't. And if I do, then I will have to quarantine because I'm not exempt from this. So I have to make a decision about that because of the responsibilities I have to my work community. So we're all in it together. And I know what this means, but we're either being serious about trying to protect our community so that we can keep school going, or we're not. And so that's why this is actually a pretty important policy. You'll note that it says temporary, and then Cinda's request to have language built in that reinforces the idea of agility and flexibility, will do. I mean, none of what we've talked about over the last few months is going to be forever. The question is, when will it end? And so, the quicker that we can put an end to this, the better. And then we won't need to have this. But in the meantime, we have to have guidance that provides a way for us to, advise our community and our employees. And so this is it, but it is temporary.
Great, thank you. Anything else, board? All right. So we are on to public comments on agenda items. Shannon has graciously agreed to report those in.
So we have 2 emails that came in during our meeting tonight, and no forms came through via our website. So first will be Melissa LaFlotte at 30 Jessica Drive. My name is Melissa LaFlotte, and I live at 30 Jessica Drive in Merrimack. Listening to the meeting, I heard Mark McLaughlin say it would not be reasonable for football players to be required to be fully remote, as they would receive a lesser education. The statement points out how abundantly clear it is the fully remote students are not being given the same quality education or consideration as the kids who will be doing hybrid. It is also important in the insanely small list of available classes for remote students. Shannon Barnes is absolutely correct when she said that all students should be considered when making these decisions. I understand that this has been an extremely difficult situation for the district to work out, but first and foremost, the equality of our children's education, whether hybrid or remote, should have been squared away first. Thank you, Melissa LaFlotte.
Can I know this is highly unusual, but I know we don't have a practice of commenting, but I just can't let that go.
Okay.
My comment tonight had to do with the question of requiring football players to be remote in order to play football. That's an entirely different thing than choice. So I just, I'll take things, but I just can't be misquoted. That specific reference was to the question as to whether we should allow football players to play under the conditions where they're required to be remote. And my answer was, I don't think we should require. We're not requiring anybody to do anything. We're providing choice. And so it was in that spirit that I'm supporting choice in that same respect. So these things matter. And so I know we don't normally comment, but I just want to be very clear. That is an important distinction.
Shannon?
There's a second one, Catherine Hodge, 44 Belmont Drive. It looks like it's a series. I want to make sure it's not just duplicate, so bear with me. Our team has been following state protocol, and when they are back in school, they will be wearing masks and following school protocol. There's absolutely no reason that the team should not be allowed to play this year. They're high school students, not toddlers. You will not have any data until you let the teams play. Let us have some sense of normalcy back in our lives. Okay, same, it was just a duplicate, came through twice. And then a follow-up comment, a negative COVID test should be sufficient for a return. And those are the two public comments.
Great, thank you. So now we are going to move into non-public. So before we go ahead and take our individual votes to move into non-public, I've sent you all a separate link to be able to log into that non-public call. So if you don't, did everyone receive it? Anyone not receive it?
Shannon, I did not receive it.
Okay, I sent it to Cinda. What I will do is I'm going to resend it with a start time of 10:15 because I'm also afraid it expired. So take a look for an email, reply all, that will have a new time.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. So, okay, to move into non-public session, RSA 91-A:3, Roman numeral 2, A, B, and C. Lori, how do you vote?
Cinda, I lost connection, so I just got back in.
Okay, I'm just asking you to whether or not you vote to go into non-public.
Oh, yes,
session.
I do. I vote to go into non-public session.
Okay, Brandy?
I vote in favor.
Okay, Andy?
Favor?
Okay, Shannon?
In favor.
And I vote in favor, so that motion carries 5-0-0. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Merrimack TV is committed to our community. From gavel-to-gavel coverage of town and school board meetings to updates on town services and projects, we aim to keep you connected.
Good morning, I'm Kyle Fox, Public Works Director for the town of Merrimack.
Hi, I'm Diane Trippett. I'm the town clerk tax collector for the town of Merrimack.
I'm Captain Matt Tarleton with the Merrimack, New Hampshire Police Department.
And keep the public informed of every motion.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
And many moments, so you can be confident that we're here for you. Thanks for watching. Stay connected. Follow Merrimack TV on Facebook.